Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
We were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here.
How many men have you killed, Malone?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious Randy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. While you rested in your cradle of power, you were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. And now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through. It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope!
We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such time, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us.
Forgive me. I did not see. I have failed you all.
You will bring me. John, I do not know what strength is in my heart. But I swear to you, I will not let the light city fall. Our people failed. Our people. Our people.
I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins.
No. Now it ends.
Man, shout out to Abs for helping me put that intro together. Every time it just makes me want to put a fellowship together. Start walking to Mordor, even though one does not simply walk to Mordor. All right, welcome to The Narrative, episode 11, people. We have made it past episode 10. The show has not been canceled. I do not think this is the episode that's going to get the show canceled. So if you have been enjoying it, really appreciate your support, liking the show, sharing the show. Looking forward to this episode tonight. Bit of housekeeping. There are windstorms rattling my house. And I have warned my guest tonight. I have also warned the Heroldian dialectic himself that I could just disappear. It's possible that I could disappear during this stream. I hope it doesn't happen. I don't think it's going to happen. If it does, my guest will stay here and he'll do a 24-hour stream. That's our agreement, and we'll figure it out either way. I don't plan on that happening. Before we get into tonight's show, I do want to thank our main sponsor tonight, formerly known as EasyRx. They have since rebranded to the catchier and easier to remember Save Pulse. Save Pulse is committed to keeping you and your family healthy with top quality medications like amoxicillin, azithromycin, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and more. Our ordering process is streamlined for your convenience, and we pride ourselves on offering unbeatable prices. Now's the time to prepare for any health scenario. Head on over to badlandsmedia.tv/meds. Stock up on essential antibiotics and viral care medications. Ensure you're ready for anything by visiting badlandsmedia.tv/meds. Don't forget to use the promo code BADLANDS at checkout. That gets you 10% off orders over $150. Badlandsmedia.tv/meds. Promo code BADLANDS. I know it probably sounds a little jarring to say orders over $150, but if any of you have used EasyRx, Save Pulse before, you'll know that they tend to have bulk medications that, these medications that were popularized by one Donald J. Trump during the COVID era. And I'm envisioning a world where we're not seen as lunatics for taking these medications. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Robert Kennedy, the Maha movement, all that kind of stuff. So we will thank them again later. Thank you to Save Pulse for sponsoring this episode. My guest tonight is going to be interesting. It could backfire on me because I sort of specialize in saying stuff, putting words together, theorizing. We have baseless conspiracies on this network all the time. And the problem with bringing this guest on is he actually knows stuff. So there's things he could debunk. There's things that he'll probably humor me on. But I actually wanted to have him on the narrative in particular because while he is very versed on actuals, as I call them, I find it very refreshing how often he talks about narratives, power projection, different forms of power projection. And the other little trick of me bringing him on is that I have seen this man 3 times last year at the various Guard events, and I would say combined, we have gotten to speak to each other for about 15, 16 seconds in those 3 visits combined. So this is our chance to have a conversation. Without further ado, I would like to welcome General Stephen Kwast. Welcome to the show, General.
Thank you. This is very fun. That's going to be an enjoyable evening to visit more deeply about what's going on around us.
And in case anybody who's a regular around these parts is worried, General Kwast is well aware that I am not the most concise. That means the show is probably going to be beyond 30 minutes, but I'll try my best. We'll see how this goes. Yeah, it was funny. People might think that we were powwowing before the show and figuring out a grand strategy, but what the general was actually helping me with was applying game theory to a 6-week-old baby, which you definitely need at this stage of the game. So, yeah. Mrs. Bright's in the chat. The general gave me a suggestion for a book that he swears by, so I'm going to add that to the list.
Yeah, it's a formidable a challenge to have a baby, and we're all outwitted, outmatched. God gives those babies a genius that they aren't even aware of to outsmart you and get what they need and what they want. And bringing them into a world where you sleep at a certain time and you wake at a certain time and you eat at a certain time it's not easy. And
exactly. I had this naive assumption like, oh, the fact that I have a chaotic schedule already is probably going to be good because I'll adjust to chaos. But it turns out that when you add chaos to chaos, not the best mix. So we're going to figure it out, though. The most important thing, he's healthy. Mrs. Bright's a rock star. And God builds some fail-safes. I had said when we had this baby, if you don't believe in God before having a baby, I don't know how you can look at one afterwards and have that feeling. And they've got all the fail-safes built in that you'll be feeling at your wit's end, and then he'll smile at you, and you're like, okay, this is why I'm doing all this.
Well, so there's so many things to talk about, but it's interesting. Even the conversation about a baby applies to what's going on in our world right now, because ultimately the baby gains a sense of security and peace and sanctity from a structure. from a discipline, a habit. And if it's chaos, there's insecurity, there's fear. The baby does not thrive. And the same is true with humanity, that structure is important, discipline is important. But for a baby, it all has to be based in love and structured from a place of love, a belief in this family as the most powerful unit on the planet. And same is true with our governance and the structure and our discipline. And that's why our Constitution is so unique, is that it is the first one ever that is embodied governance based on an idea that originated from God in the Bible. And that is, we are infinite creatures of free will. And you have to structure something that preserves that free will. And what we're experiencing is the destruction of that free will in the form of slavery, it's fascinating. So just as a baby needs structure, we need structure as people, but we have to know it's rooted in truth and love. And right now, that's what we're fighting.
Very well said. It's interesting. I think if you fancy yourself in the truth community or America First, however you want to define it, a first principles thinker, I mean, people hear allusions and references to the Constitution all the time, not just in the US, but worldwide. But the deeper you dig into the info war, into strategy, into game theory, into governance, into society, the more special that the Constitution becomes. It doesn't mean it was completely fallible. You could argue, hey, if it was a perfect system that had been set up, it couldn't have been subverted over time to the degree that it was. Maybe there is no perfect system. But what you point out there, I think, is it's strange that it was a later in life epiphany for me as I made the transition from being ideologically liberal to, MAGA, America First, all this kind of stuff. But the idea, I lived in Canada for a time, and sometimes they give me crap. I love them. I love my Canadian family, but I've said that it was very jarring for me, not just with some of my American family, but particularly in Canada, where I noticed in that COVID era, it wasn't that people agreed with government overreach more than others. Like, it wasn't as cartoonish as that. But I noticed that people in these other countries, it's almost like they don't even consider the fact that you could opt out of certain things, right? And it doesn't mean there aren't consequences to you doing so and going against power structures, but it was eye-opening for me during that era of recognizing that no, the American sort of core is different than these other places. And I think what you hit on there is that it's this very simple idea that your rights are something you just have. These are things that come out of you, and I use the term radiation, like they radiate outward is the idea. And in some other countries that fancy themselves free, they fundamentally don't really believe that. It's like they think you appoint somebody to give you rights, and you put a government in place that lends these rights down. And it's a subtle inversion, but it may be the intentional inversion, right? Of where that dialectic starts.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And, for me, having grown up in a different culture, a different society, and being able to look at America, having been raised in an African tribe and being able to look at it through the lens of somebody that didn't grow up in America. And then my entire adult life in the international affairs, national security arena, where I spent a lot of time with people from many of the countries we're going to talk about tonight, like Ukraine and Russia and the Middle East and Asia. And I will tell you, most Americans don't see it because we grow up in this culture, but you saw it in Canada, but it is palpable. And there's a twofold dynamic. One is they fear us because this organic sense of rights, this it's almost this maverick inside of us that will not tolerate anybody trampling on these God-given rights. They fear us because there's a very powerful strength in that. It's like, in the martial arts, and we haven't been able to talk about that. My art was judo.
All right. Yeah.
And but again, I'm nowhere near where you have gone with that. But I learned early on from my sensei that I can remember as soon as I came to America and I was getting involved in judo, he said, "Steve, the happiest man will win any fight." And I thought to myself, what are you talking about? What does that mean?
Yeah.
That's
good advice.
Yeah, but it comes down to this sense of strategy and clear-mindedness, and having this foundation of joy that comes from having a relationship with your maker, this faith that is so powerful in the American psyche. But there's another component of that they wish they could be like us, and so one quick story on that, because this one is really telling, and it's about Russia. So one of my jobs was I was the general officer in charge of strategy and policy for Russia, NATO, and Europe. And at the time, NATO was basically the main player in Afghanistan, and I had just come back from being the commander there at Bagram Airfield for the Air Forces in Afghanistan, as well as the provincial reconstruction teams. And this is where all the NGOs were trying to build schools and roads and security. We took a trip to Russia, and it was where we were trying to convince them that our Aegis Ashore, which is basically the missile defense shield that we have in Europe, but we have it on the ships at sea, that if we moved it on land, like to Poland, that it would not threaten their intercontinental ballistic missile system, basically Russia's nuclear force. They were worried that we were going to threaten that, and if we did, it would, deconstruct all of the mutual assured destruction and the Cold War architecture that had been put in place. And there's a whole nother conversation we need to talk about of what Trump is doing that is so brilliant. But back to this story. So we're sitting there with our chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which was Admiral Mullen at the time. And then shortly after that, it was General Dempsey, but it was Admiral Mullen at the table. And then General Makarov, who is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff equivalent on the Russian side at the time. And we're in there, and Admiral Mullen is trying to convince General Makarov that these missiles are not going to threaten your nuclear structure, that this is meant to defend against a rogue Iranian missile that could come into Europe. And so we're here to protect them. And we ought to partner on this so that we can protect you as well. And we all protect ourselves from rogue actors in the Middle East. And General Makarov listened, and you could tell he was growing more and more upset as Admiral Mullen was trying to convince him, and with technology showing the velocity differences, the altitude, the speed, and how if a missile was launched out of Russia to the U.S., there's no way these missiles could catch it. And finally, General Makarov literally slammed his hands on the table and stood up. And the poor little there were only a few people in the room, but the poor little interpreter was probably a 23-year-old kid who was scared to death, especially as this massive general that looked like a bear, started yelling at the top of his lungs at us on the other side of the table. And our interpreter was a woman who was an Israeli fighter pilot, grew up in Poland, knew Russian cold. She was one of the best strategists, and she still is, but one of the best strategists that knew multiple languages and could discern deception,
Right.
at a moment's notice. Anyway, she listened to General Makarov scream at the top of his lungs for a good long time. And you know how this goes, where somebody will talk for a long time. I have no idea what he was saying, neither did because he doesn't know Russian. But this interpreter, she sure knew what he was saying, and she turns to us after he finally settles down and says, "Boss, he's telling you, it's bullshit." He said, "We know you Americans are so damn innovative that the moment we put Sputnik up in space in 1957, and you crazy people put a man on the moon." He said,
the one-upsmanship.
I know for a fact that you put these missiles in Poland, and the moment you want them to take down our missiles, you'll go apeshit like you did going to the moon, and you'll just tell an engineer to do it, and it will threaten our ICBMs. And so until I get a signature by President Obama legally binding you to not threaten our nuclear forces, we have no deal, and you will never convince me otherwise, so stop wasting your time. That's the fear of what America is, because we are an open society. We listen to the idea, not the color of your skin, your pedigree, your socioeconomic status. And they wish they had the guts to innovate like we innovate. They wish they had the freedom to be the good rebels that know how to take risk and run. And it scares the hell out of them.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's funny because you've seen the shows, we've talked quite a few times, and I had this journey from a leftist, and I try not to frame that as saying I was a leftist and then I became on the right wing, right? Because I still hold many of the criticisms I had as a leftist of, for instance, the Bush era. One of the things I'm encouraged about with Trumpism is that I feel that that Trump, largely through narrative, has during the Biden era, and I think accelerating going forward, has started to really try to pull the cart away from republicanism, conservatism necessarily, versus liberalism, and talk about first principles and these ideas. And the reason I bring that up is that when I fancied myself a liberal, I would misinterpret what you say there about like Americanism and think like, oh, here we go, rah rah American, we're the best, we're whatever. But I like what you're saying is the why. That as I've kind of gone through this journey, I've reverse engineered it all the way back to going, actually, Americans and Americanism is very special. It's not because we're the best fighters. It's not because of any of that, although we are. It's because it's why. Why are we? And I think that's what you're getting at there. I really like that analogy where you said, or the advice you got in judo of a happy fighter wins. That's interesting. I remember when I was fighting, I used to also work as a sports journalist at the same time. So I would be interviewing fighters, and of course I would take the opportunity to, sneak in personal questions and just say, hey, what's your advice for me? Like I'd be talking to George St. Pierre and some of these different fighters. And I remember I was speaking to Frank Mir, an American former UFC champion, and I told him one time, he was asking me after the interview, like I said, yeah, I'm having a hard time with anxiety in fights, just crippling anxiety. I've said before, it's not war. It's of course not war. It's not a combat mission, right? But your body, your mind doesn't know that when you're in there. All it sees, this guy's trying to hurt me and I've got to stay calm. And I was looking for some sort of secret, like how do I be better at fighting? And all he said was, until you can remember thinking in a fight, like after the fight, the first fight you have that you can remember the decisions you were making, you'll know you've hit a new level. And I remembered that and then made it my mission for the next fight to not win or lose or any of that. It was just try to think, try to go in and think, and then everything else slows down. It's like when you're able to think. And one of the major reasons I wanted to have you on, besides all of your experience, is specifically, this show is the narrative. I talk about storytelling. I talk about narrative warfare. I first met General Kwast in Florida, I believe, a couple of years ago. And similar to that, you know, we talk on these shows in Badlands and in this truth community. We call it the info war, right? And then we've got ideas of fifth generation warfare. But there's times you can feel like, man, is it really warfare? Are we just talking about stuff on podcasts? You know, it's not the same thing as going to war, right? But I think that we've really understood this is a form of warfare. It's a different form of warfare. And I remember talking to you in Florida and saying, yeah, like, I don't know what's going on with Russia. And people keep asking me Russia questions because I wrote a series about it. And I don't know what the truth is. And you had said to me at that time that, you know, that's not what you're bringing to the table. What you're bringing to the table is a focus on storytelling and narrative power and how important that is. And it's something that you talk about quite a bit. I find it interesting that you've got this long military career, which I'd be interested, the audience would be interested in hearing kind of, you know, your most relevant, how are you able to take away such a focus on narrative warfare and different forms of power projection that it seems from the outside looking in that maybe a lot of military minds aren't thinking in that way, unless maybe I'm mischaracterizing it. But just recognizing that you've flown combat missions. General Kwast has flown hundreds, thousands of hours of combat missions, strategic command, all of that. And yet you equally or even more so focus on the importance of this storytelling and narrative power when it comes to individuals and nation states.
Yeah, well, you know, part of it I think comes from having the blessing or the cultural experience of growing up in a different culture, and then coming to America at an age where it created an awakening that I think was unusual. Just the shock of moving from one world paradigm and growing up immersed in one culture and then being thrown in, you know, it was from the jungles of Africa to the jungles of LA, where my dad, you know, took a church and then as a pastor and then was a teacher at the Bible Institute of Los Angeles, Biola University in intercultural studies. So that's part of it. But, you know, the military, being able to pursue my passion of flying and then couple it with my inspiration of looking at this Constitution and this government and how unique it is, you know, took me on a path of this military journey. But I'm going to bypass the military portion of it and all those lessons because I want to spend the time talking about what President Trump is doing and what he has been doing. And he is just the tip of the spear, meaning that right. As we all know, this has been building for a long time. I mean, this has been the systematic theft and slavery of, well, ultimately the entire globe, if they could have gotten away with it. And we finally have a group of leaders that have recognized it and have figured out a way to hang them on their own petard, if you will. Or and so the level of strategy that's going on, the level of wisdom, the level of cleverness, of understanding how human nature is mechanized and how cultures are structured and how politics works in other countries as well as in America. The levels of this complexity are just so fascinating and so fun. We are so lucky to live in this age because we are watching something that's epic. And it's more than just the transition of one epic to another, one era to another, like the agrarian age, the industrial age. It is more than that. It is not just the journey from the industrial age to the networked age. It is coupled with the breakout of people to be free once again across the globe in so many ways. So, so why narrative is so important is really at the heart of the art of war. So, you know, if you want to break it right down, my job is to provide national security to America. And so that is the art of war is about strategy. It is not about weapons and tactics. In fact, it's the better term is the art of peace, because through strategy and strength, you never have to fire a shot. I can win a judo fight by just being at peace. This joy is really being at peace, where you can think, your mind is clear, and things slow down, and you can watch your adversary come at you. And then in judo, as you know, the peaceful way, I can just use the momentum of this 300-pound man when I'm just a scrawny 150 pounds back then when I was fighting. And by just placing your foot right where their foot and momentum is going, and then just tapping them in the right direction, they fly across the room and hit the ground with 300 pounds of momentum behind them, and you've got yourself some scoring, and you do that a few times, and you've won. And you didn't have to fire a shot. You didn't have to break their leg or hurt them. They hurt themselves just by flailing or not being peaceful. So narrative warfare, and the reason this is, what you say, the story is a war and the war is a story, is so true, is that everything about life, you take us back to the caveman days. The caveman in the cave to the left, they could convince the caveman in the cave to the right that caveman's best interest was to bring him food and make fire for him and help him out for his own good. That was narrative warfare, and he won. And it's economic. It's about, providing the essentials of security, and then food, water, and shelter for you and your family. And so we especially as an American culture, fall into this trap where sometimes our movies and our stories tell us about war, and it glorifies the violence, or it glorifies the weapons, the tactics, and people misplace their heroism, because the heroism really is placed on the courage of people who are willing to lay down their life for their brother or their sister. And that courage is important, but they misplace it by that courage being manifested in violence or action, when the real art is to win the strategy. And that's what has been happening here, is that because America has been so powerful and strong on the kinetic side, a clever enemy figures out a way to win without firing a shot. And that's what's been going on. The financial and the information warfare that has been taking place for over 100 years, and even further back, depending on how you slice it, has been nothing short of brilliant to put the human race to sleep. And we've been victims of that because of our prosperity. Because ultimately, part of the bad side of human nature is we tend to be lazy if we can get away with it. And that's not a bad thing. That actually preserves energy, and there's all kinds of reasons in the wild why, not acting if you don't have to act is smart. But we've gotten lazy, and so we have become victims of this narrative warfare that then has the financial teeth that ratchets it's like a slow growing vine around our spinal cord, and we're dead before we know it.
Yeah, well said. I mean, I like to, there are so many directions. We're going to have to do multiple shows. There's so many directions we could go down. But I like how you said, one of the things I want to talk about tonight, as people know, I pretend to have a structure for the show, and then we don't. But the first half of the show, this topic, I do want to talk about Trump and, the advent of Trump 2.0. Later on, I do want to touch on, if we've got time, energy specifically. I'm really fascinated by our conversations on energy. That kind of dovetails a little bit into what you touched on there with financial power. It's not just narrative power. There are so many different types of power projection. But, one thing, I joke about the Canadians, right? We kicked their butt in a hockey game the other night. I'm married to one, etc. But speaking of the advent of Trump 2.0, I think there's a few things going on, and from a storytelling or narrative level, and I'd like your thoughts on it. The reason I mention Canada or think of Canada is, of course, we've got this big storyline recently of like a trade war. And during Trump 1.0, it was Trump versus China. I've got some kind of out there ideas on Trump and Xi, and maybe there's a little bit more mutual mutually beneficial soft warfare going on there, a bit of an agreed upon decoupling. That may be a bit crazy, but when it comes to the North American theater, the West, let's call it, Europe and Europa and to the West, I can see and know because of family members that there is genuine sort of shock at what Trump is doing. It's not just the liberal idiots. It's not just orange man bad. Like, there are family members I have, Canadians, who are kind of sitting there and I think shocked about, well, why is he coming after us? And to me, it seems like a lot of what Trump is doing here, I think he's starting to dispel, or I hope he's starting to dispel this notion that a lot of these people have, that he's fallen ass backwards into the most successful political career in American history, and that he's fallen ass backwards into this extremely powerful social movement behind him, where he's got liberals like me that are diehard Trump supporters now. This all ties back into narrative warfare, and one of my key, projections or arguments is that Donald Trump is a master of narrative warfare, a master of it. And I think that what we are seeing in these Canada deployments, North America, are hints of that. And I'm wondering how you see his deployments when it comes to these threats of trade wars, and what is he doing in your estimation, both for the United States and, in my opinion, for these other countries, for these Canadians and Mexicans? What do you think his end game is here, and how does narrative play into it versus sort of actual power projection?
Yeah, so and the narrative is power projection. I'll start with that. I mean, it is more effective than hard power. I mean, hard power has its place, but Trump is a master at this, and it's so sophisticated. It's really just crazy. So let me start first by the wisdom of his approach, and I'll harken back to the wisest man on the planet, King Solomon. Okay, so King Solomon is sitting there, and these two women come up, and they're arguing over this baby. And this one woman is saying, that's my baby, and the other is my baby. And so King Solomon is discerning what's going on in the heart of these two women, okay? And how do I figure out or get them to reveal their true heart? And so he does something that shocks everybody. He said, give me a sword, I'll cut the baby in half. You can have half the baby, you can have the other half of the baby. And the real mother screams, no, give it to her, to save her baby. Okay, so what Trump is doing on an international level, and again, this is from a lifetime of studying the geopolitics, the culture, and the human nature embodied in the governance of every country on the planet. Trump is playing a master game of revealing what is going on and helping people ask questions. And you're right, it is shocking, okay? But if you understand the deeper underpinnings of what's going on, it makes sense. And I'll just say this one thing, and then I want you to respond to that, because then we can go into some other layers of his narrative mastery. So he says something as provocative as what he says about Canada, and he watches the reaction, but he's not just watching the reaction of Canada and the people, but also the governance. And he is playing on a foundation that there is something planted deep in the heart of every human being, that they want to be free, and they want the justice, the hard work they put into their life gives them a just reward. And this knowledge that everybody feels everywhere around the world, that they are being robbed insidiously and structurally through taxation without representation, through inflation, through all of the methods that the globalists have designed to try to maintain power and control. So I'll stop there, but I'll say that some of these things that people think are bombastic and are shocking are very sophisticated narrative deployments that help reveal, both on the geopolitical level and down to the individual level, some questions people start asking that start changing the game, just like Captain Kirk changed the programming to win a game that was designed to be unwinnable. President Trump is using narrative warfare to disentangle this Gordian knot in such a way that you can line the fabric and bring about a peaceful outcome.
I promise that I am not General Kwast back in time. As you know, I've been talking about the Captain Kirk analogy a lot. I mean, it's a perfect one. Elon Musk, I think, is tweeting about that recently. He's making references to the Kobayashi Maru, and I think to your the Canadian thing is very interesting to me, and I think it's not just because I know a lot of Canadians. It's because we're so similar and so different. I learned that living there. Like, you go to Canada, you don't get culture shock, right? It's not like you're going, you grew up in Cameroon, right? Like that. If I went to Cameroon, there's some culture shock going on there. When you go to Quebec, maybe French-speaking Canada, but English Canada, it's like you would think you're in the U.S. until you get to some of these core philosophical beliefs. But with Donald Trump, I found it fascinating that, I'd find myself, we're trying to connect with somebody who we know is not MAGA. We know they think Trump is an idiot, but you're still trying to have a productive conversation. I found myself in this situation with a lot of my Canadian in-laws and people who are smart people who are not ideologues, not far leftist communists, right? If anything, they're probably fiscally conservative. A lot of them are white collar accountants, etc., smart people, successful people. But they've got this image of Trump as this idiot, like this just because of the stuff he says. The irony is that, as you say, the narrative is more important. I've been saying that for a long time. You say it all the time. It's not just important. It is more important. And one of the interesting things I think about what he's doing here is, as you said, he's surfacing these problems. I mean, how many Canadians knew before a few weeks ago that 75% of their economy is dependent on us allowing their exports? Like, now, leaving aside whether or not they think Orange Man is mean, should Canada, as the largest landmass in the world, I believe it's the largest land area in the world in terms of a nation, it's got some of the most energy reserves on planet Earth. It has a highly educated Western moral culture until Trudeau let in all the Syrians and, migrants, etc. Isn't that the pinnacle of a nation that should be self-sustaining? And, that's John Harold and I had talked about this on an episode of Power Hour weeks ago, where we're saying maybe the point here is that Canadians are getting angry at Trump as step one, and he wants them to get angry. And at some point, you think the pitchforks turn around and say, were you guys aware that your government sold you out, and that very literally the United States does not need Canada at all? Like, it's not to be mean to them. It's to say that 5% of American exports go to Canada. 5%. That's a haircut. Yeah. So we could replace that with anybody else. And Trudeau, we saw this narrative deployment come out months ago, where one of the things Trudeau blinked at the table with the lion, with Trump, where he said, if you do this, our economy is going to collapse. And it's so funny when you're not thinking in terms of narrative warfare, when you assume Trump is an idiot, you're not able to see what just happened there is Justin lost that negotiation right when he said that, because he ceded all that power, right? But I'm curious how you feel about that aspect of things, of Trump is obviously advocating for the American people, but as you said, he does seem to have more to it here. He seems to be talking to the people in these other nations too, even though maybe he knows in the short term they're going to be pissed off at him at first.
Yeah, no, there's no question that this is a messaging methodology, and it's more than just one nation at a time. Ultimately, I'll just kind of state the strategy in general. America is going to lead the rest of the human race into a future of freedom, prosperity, and security and health. And most people on the planet do not realize how enslaved they are. And the Canada piece is just one. So yes, the brilliance and the simplicity of one comment that over a period of a short amount of time, really in the arc of history, wakes a society up to say, well, hell, I wanted some of that. I want to follow that nation called America into this golden age with the kind of sovereignty, prosperity, health, and security that I control. And why the hell has my government not done what Trump is doing for Americans? Right. And he wants us to join him. Okay. And, so there's a method to the madness that is simple. I mean, like the tit for tat tariffs, okay, you do it to us, we're going to do it to you. Simple. It can be understood by somebody who has never studied, math or geopolitics or global finance. Okay. If, right. If you force me to pay you a penny for that, I'm going to force you to pay me a penny for that. It's brilliant. So this is part of a much larger game, and it's not just Canada, and we can get into his relationships with Russia, China, India, North Korea, Iran. I mean, we ought to get into that because these are all knitted together, and this is part of a massive global movement of individual sovereignty by nations. And the other thing he is doing, and this is kind of a side conversation from the main one we're having here, but I think it's worth noting. Most people in the world have because there are, we kind of have filled the continents, if you will, with nation states. And there's no wild, wild west like there was before the Louisiana Purchase, or, when Australia was just a place where the Brits would dump their prisoners. There is a sensation that the end of change has arrived, meaning, okay, America will be what it is, and Canada will be what it is, and Greenland will be what it is, okay? President Trump is also reminding the entire globe that the best way to predict the future is to make it, and that there's nothing is off the table. We are only limited by our own imagination on what kind of changes we want to make as a human race to bring, the things that are foundational to all people. We love our families. We want to bring, we want those things that provide, and it's not just food, water, and shelter and security. It's also energy, and we'll talk about that because that's foundational to the first,
Right.
And it's transportation, it's healthcare, it's communication, and so and then community. Then we need to talk more about communication, because all of this we've been brought to this point of slavery as a human race because of people that were masters at narrative warfare. And we were asleep at the switch. And so one of the things Trump has done is he is connected with world leaders on this foundational feeling inside the nation's leaders that their people want to be free, secure, and prosperous. They want to be sovereign. And this effort to put the human race to sleep has infested every country in the world. And when he starts building on that common ground of strategic common ground with China, India, Russia, North Korea, there is the eyes open in these other leaders. There's a bond, there's a friendship, because it's rooted at something far beyond borders or politics or even ideology. It's something that lies in the heart of every human being, the desire to protect your family and yourself by being your own sovereign security, prosperity, health. And that's masterful. And now in this third term, President Trump is actually executing on the plan.
Well said. I want to get into Russia and everything. Maybe that'll be the next topic, but I do want to hit on a couple of things you said there. First of all, I love that you mentioned, Greenland. It's we've got the Panama Canal deployment. You use the word deployment, narrative deployments, and I totally agree with you. Part of the method to that madness seems to be, you sort of mentioned the Socratic method earlier, and renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. It's mimetic. It's almost silly. But what it hits on is an underlying truth that you point out. It's that we're born into this world that's it's done, right? Like you said, it's almost like we're born into a story that seems to be done. And we read about history, and what is history? What are we reading about? We're reading about change, right? Like you don't make it in, let's just assume the history books are true for the sake of argument. You're reading about great change events, right? You don't document the history of a bunch of sameness happening for 200 years. You're looking at a timeline of here's a chapter on this change. Here's a chapter on this change. And then people go, you can't change what the Panama Canal is or what Greenland is. And Trump's response, part of, I think, the method to the madness of the character of Donald Trump is why not, right? And he just forces and sometimes the why not is going to have a reasonable response maybe. And he'll go, oh, yeah, you're right about that. All right, we won't do that. We'll let them keep their canal or whatever it is. We'll let Denmark keep Greenland. But it's so funny. Speaking of Greenland, I had read in the weeks following Trump's Greenland deployment, Politico had sent reporters to Greenland, thinking probably that they're going to drum up, they're going to source some local Greenlanders, and they're going to write a new Orange Man Bad piece about this dictator, and now he's treating us as he's dehumanizing Greenlanders by doing this and talking about them like a trade ship almost. And something like 65% of the Greenlanders they talked about were supportive of what Trump was saying. And what it unearthed in the public narrative was this idea that Greenlanders had been subjugated by Denmark. And Denmark, I hate to break it to them, don't matter, right? And when I say that, I'm being facetious, right? But it's like, there is a certain thing backstopping the Trump deployments, which is that, as you know, in your career, we do have actual power projection capabilities that dwarf most others. And it's almost this strange recognition that, wait a second, how many people knew that Denmark had dominion over this massive landmass that is vital to American and Canadian national security? And, I'd like you to hit on not just the security aspect, but that storytelling. And one more point on it would be that it feels to me like Trump, and by extension, many of his supporters who were maybe a little quiet in the first term and, beaten down on a narrative level, there's this posture now of where the establishment and the system, the world order right now, the story is going, how dare you? How dare you even talk about Greenland like this? How dare you even challenge Canada, the mighty, irrelevant, tiny Canada, like compared to the United States? And I feel like the posture Trump is giving off is, as you said, with the sovereign peoples of all of these different nations, how dare you? How dare you as the system tell us as sovereigns that we can't control our own future, as you said? And I don't know if you had seen, J.D. Vance spoke to European leaders a couple of days ago. And I know people can be mixed back and forth. We've been burned many times by trusting people in this audience. But hey, he's on there with Donald Trump's blessing. And just listening to the words he's saying, it shocked those leaders of how dare this man come in here and just say all of the obvious things. It seemed to me that he wasn't talking to Americans. He was talking to the German people, the French people, and saying, you've got a bunch of harpies and bureaucrats in this room. Why are you listening to these people anymore? That's all a story, right?
That's right. No, it was beautiful. And and because I know so many of the people that are, not the politicians, but the people, he was speaking to their knowledge of how they feel oppressed. They feel the weight of this oppression and this, especially the clamping down of them being able to express their opinion, their ideology, their beliefs. You suffer. It's different in different countries in Europe, but you go into Europe, and in many places, you feel this sense of suffocation by the government. And it, some places are better than others. But the way I would describe it between America and these and the European culture, if you will, is in America, if it's not forbidden, you can do it. In other words, you can do anything. And if we have good lawyers, there are very few laws. So you can pretty much do anything unless it's forbidden. So murder, of course, is forbidden. Stealing is forbidden. And the fewer laws we have, the better. But in Europe, it is forbidden unless it is specifically permitted. And so
that's a great way to say it.
You can't do it unless you read through the law and make sure it says somewhere you are allowed to drink a beer in a beer garden, an Oktoberfest.
Right.
And so this suffocates the human spirit of freedom. And they look at Americans and are like, I want some of that.
Absolutely. I mean, that's that inversion, right? Our friend Chris Paul often says, one of my favorite sort of quotes he says is total inversion within the false reality. It's this idea, as we said earlier, that it's subtle. I don't think most Canadians or Germans are walking around. Maybe now they are, but a few years ago, they're not walking around going like, I'm not quite as free as my neighbors to the south. I don't think they feel that because they're working normal jobs, they're watching American TV, they're turning the sports on, etc. But then an interesting thing for me is I'll often find myself talking to my Canadian in-laws, for example, and they'll be complaining about all of these problems with the way Canada is running its system. As an example, both of my in-laws have been successful. They've worked white-collar jobs, and they are seeing the systematic, planned destruction of the people below them. Like, they're going to be okay. They worked their whole careers. But they're doing mass layoffs. They've got these DEI quotas, similar to what we were doing. And they're outsourcing. A lot of these formerly white-collar jobs that seemed protected, right? It's only the people working in factories, those MAGA people, that are losing their jobs to immigrants, and maybe they should just learn to code, right? Like, that was I'm not saying this is what these people think, but that's the elitist liberal mentality. Kind of changes when all of a sudden Indians on visas are taking your job in the healthcare sector or your job in the accounting world, and they're willing to do it for half the money, and they're sending that overseas, right? So what's interesting, though, is they'll remark on these things. They'll complain about these things. And these days, I'll just hit them with a quick, like, oh, you sound kind of like MAGA. Who's doing something about that in the US is Trump. And what I'm finding is that it's so interesting that when you really ask somebody who's not like a complete crazy person, why do you dislike what Donald Trump is doing? There's nothing there. Like, there's no, you can go under these layers. There's no logical framework to the disagreement. You would just say, hey, I don't like that he's going after us with tariffs. And the response might be, well, why is your country dependent on the United States? Do you think you should be? Well, no. Well, is that Donald Trump's fault, or is that the Canadian government's fault, right? And it seems like maybe that's part of the point of what's going on here.
Yeah, no, that is. And, when you listen very carefully to the leadership in Munich giving the rebuttal to J.D. Vance's speech, you can hear the cultural incentives that the leadership is trying to imprint on the population, and that is, you need to be fair and equitable. Those Americans are reckless and they're dangerous. So you gotta be careful with the culture is very powerful. And it's one reason why Hitler, it was so easy and quick for Hitler to take over the country legally. A constitution is no protection against subversion. Culture is actually the most powerful thing to protect it, but only a culture that is based in a belief, that is based in a worldview that recognizes that we are moral creatures and we are infinite creatures. So, and this goes back to point number one at the very beginning of all this, and that is when you have a culture of people, a group of people that have a worldview where there is a God, and that God made you and loves you, and then you have a constitution that is based on that worldview and the beliefs and the values that come out of that. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not covet. Then you have something that you can protect. It's not the Constitution that's going to protect you. It's not even the culture that will protect you. It is what you believe. That is the only thing that will be sticky in the arc of history. And this is why there's basically no civilization that has lasted. You've heard me say this before, of the 21 societies or civilizations that you can study in detail. You find the same arc of birth and then death, and it's based on human nature. You're born in vigor, and you recognize the need for these things that are foundational, and that is a worldview that is common to people that live there. And then the beliefs, the values, the policies, and the laws and the regulations that grow out of that. And then the need to fight for it and protect it every single day. But then every generation gets lazier and lazier because they're prosperous. And then somebody stronger comes in and kicks their ass, and they're on the trash heap of history.
Right.
Trump is breaking that sine wave for America. We were on the downslope, and we all knew it. All of us that study history, study human nature, study geopolitics, and study technology, which we'll get to with energy here. And we could see that America's dominance in the globe was going to last only another 50 years if we were lucky. And with the acceleration of Moore's law and inventions and technologies, it could have been even quicker with the advent of AI and quantum and some energy developments that are going to be taking place here. And those of us that study technology, history, this is one reason why the Space Force was such a damn important idea that was scoffed at for decades. We were trying to fight for it. And we can get into that later, but this is back to the central point of Trump's narratives. He is essentially trying to prevent the whole human race from sliding into a death trap of being asleep and enslaved perpetually.
Yeah, the little things, right? The little deployments. And okay, one more topic before the Russia thing that I want to hit on, of course, is when you mention Munich and the response to J.D. Vance. Well, one of the ways I characterize Trump is not just that he's a master of narrative, but that he is a narrative, like a human. In my writing, I call them ciphers, templates. You could think Elon Musk is one of these. I have my doubts. We talk about on the shows how much of the Doge deployments are Elon himself doing these things versus these figures acting as ciphers that are expressing first principles and kind of acting as these symbols and these reminders to people. And when you bring up the response out of these globalists and bureaucrats in Munich, when you see Justin Trudeau and Claudia Sheinbaum saber rattling, narratively saber rattling kind of in response to Trump, it reminds me of an epiphany I had when I was a sports writer. And I realized at some point along the way that most of these mainstream media sports writers, they hate the sport that they're covering. They hate the athletes, and they hate the fans. They think that they're better than you, right? And I had that rare perspective because I was a journalist who was also fighting. And they would just be writing these hit pieces. Oh, these fighters, they're all MAGA, they're all dumb, they're all conspiracy theorists. They like Joe Rogan. Joe Sixpack, the NFL doesn't respect Joe Sixpack. They hate him. They talk down to him. They ridicule him. I know that's sports, but it's like you can see that in these bureaucrats. And I think Trump represents this inversion of that, where it's almost like the establishment has tried to characterize him as being this man who came in and provoked this movement, rather than what I see as more the truth. He is the manifestation of a movement that exists within the American people. He is an American. He is Americana. He is America first. He is what we think. And it's this strange disconnect where you're seeing these leaders, as you said, in Europe. It's almost like because of Trump and these deployments, they've been forced to sort of show their people, yeah, we're going to stop pretending. We don't like you, our own people. We don't respect you. We don't work for you. You are our subjects. And that sounds dramatic, right? But it was basically the openly communicated stance of these European leaders of like, no, if your political party in Germany gets popular, we're just going to take you off the ballot. If you say something that we deem wrong, we're just going to throw you in jail. It's amazing. The longer we go, the more normal people that can kind of defend this kind of thing. I think that's part of the method to the madness of Trump's narratives, where he wants to provoke these sort of things. Maybe JD went in there, he knew probably the response he's going to get, right? And that response might be a feature of what he's saying.
That's exactly right. And this is where the manifestation of Trump as a man goes far beyond just the American experience. Every human being feels this. And so this goes back to Trump's deep wisdom about human nature. And it goes back to pride, arrogance, and vanity. We always say, it's so common to, all the philosophers, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. And anytime you have a government, if you don't give it a haircut often, the people and the institutions will then become so arrogant that they believe that they know best. And then you have Obamacare or whatever, example you want. But then people rail against a symptom and they miss the deeper underlying condition, the root cause. This is where critical thinking comes in, and why you and everybody in Badlands is so fun to listen to, because you will take a symptom and then you will talk about it as you start digging down into the root cause. And the root cause comes back to many of these things we're talking about, the principles and the narrative. And so it is brilliant. And one analogy I want to draw here is it's not just Trump saying things he said about Canada to get people to start asking some questions and to look around going, what the hell, wait a minute, this is, in their own culture, they can start actually becoming part of the soldiers that want to take back something that God gave us, and that's free will. And it's innate in everybody. But bringing it back to America and what Doge is doing and what Trump is doing within the executive branch, it's the same thing. Back to Solomon cutting the baby in half. He'll say, okay, let's wipe out, the Department of Education. And everybody's like, oh, no. or let's wipe out USAID. And, people saying, well, pregnant women in Africa will not have mosquito nets, and that was on CNN, Yep. and so you can, what it does is, but there's an important point to be made here, and it goes back to something you said about the Panama Canal, where he says, we're gonna take it over, and then he's like, well, maybe not, And again, I know this was not part of the plan of this program, because this requires a whole nother, 3-hour program. But it is the sophistication of realizing that we do need some institutions and some discipline. It's like the baby. The baby needs a wake time and a sleep time and an eat time. We need certain institutions as people because we are imperfect. And you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. In other words, there are reasons we have some of these institutions. And by Trump being bombastic about a conversation with something that might be an institution that has value, we start getting to the root cause of why it's dysfunctional, why it has grown to be so arrogant, because power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And the genius of using following the money, which never lies, is just so cool, especially because he's using it through Doge, which really was the digital services that Obama created. And he's done that on many levels, where he is entrapped and he's watched and learned and then used the weapons that have been fashioned by the people trying to enslave you to free you.
I've often said, and sometimes I get a little worried about it, but as you know, I'm a Lord of the Rings maximalist, first and foremost, before anything else, before America. But I wrote an article a couple of years ago called "The Turn," and it was about Boromir in the Lord of the Rings, who wants to use the weapon of the enemy against them. Of course, the lesson there is it'll corrupt him, right? As you said, absolute power will corrupt him. But it does feel like there's some of that going on in a good way, that there's sort of this, as you said, the Kobayashi Maru, there's this game theory going on where Trump and his allies, it sort of seems to have caught the establishment in a bit of a pincer move where, let's say he's going after USAID, for example, or one of these agencies, the Department of Education. The first reaction is, no, don't do that. And it provokes a conversation of, well, why? Well, is this necessary? And then that's exposure all on its own. But then it seems that the second part of that is what you hit on. Their next step, as the establishment goes, you can't do that. And the response of Trump, the American people, the world, seems to be going through, even many of us, we're going through a bit of a re-education process of, first of all, you're damn right I can do it because I am the sovereign. I've been vested with the power of the American people, and it turns out the American people are pretty powerful in terms of the rights we have through our president, or the rights, I should say, the rights he has through us.
Right.
But secondly, to your point about using the system, it seems like that's part of the game theory here, is him saying, well, actually, the only reason I can do this specific thing is because you were doing it the whole time. So your choices are, you let me do it because you're the one who put this in place, or we agree that nobody should be allowed to do this and we get rid of this.
Yeah, that's right. No, it's beautiful because it's the master of strategy. And and the way you know it was masterful is when you've lost and you don't even know it. And there's no way out. It's checkmate. But it's five-dimensional chess, not the normal game.
Right.
And again, we've only touched on a few layers of this because it goes much deeper, and it is just a sign of genius. And we are so damn lucky that. But it's not just Trump that we're lucky to have. It is a whole host of people that started recognizing this slippery slope we were on many, many years ago. And I'll go back to Eisenhower and Schlesinger and some of the people after World War II that kind of structured how America was going to set up its battle rhythm, if you will, globally to make sure a World War II never happens again. And this is another story, a long, sad story of how power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. There were people in that crowd that had good intentions to make sure that no person could be as powerful as Hitler and do what Hitler did. But in the process, they created a monster. And the monster was the ability for America to do things that we should not be doing. And it was truly the justification that Machiavelli is so, we talk about all the time, and that is the ends do not justify the means. And so the ends might have been good. And if you want to reread Schlesinger's famous book, Present at the Creation, it's a painful read, but it's brilliantly written, but it's that thick, So, but when you read it through the lens of what has happened since the 40s, you can start understanding how people with good intentions, hell is filled with people that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right. And one of the points about watching what President Trump is doing is that he is ushering in all of these things we talked about, but the part we haven't talked about is that it is structured so that the American people can give its government a haircut every year. And we don't wait 50 years and then, oh my God, we don't have control of this monster. So so to put it another way, there's never been a government of a nation that was not bureaucratic and lethargic and became actually a threat to the people they were supposed to govern. They all go in that direction. That's human nature. What Trump is ushering in here and what you're going to watch unfold in the next 4 years and then some is we are moving to a business model of governance where the American people are the shareholders. And those shareholders can see the audit. They can see every dollar. And no cockroaches can hide because there's a light shining on every nook and cranny of that government. And the tools of AI and other things help us as the American people have our hands on the steering wheel of this government. And it can never move in a direction that we don't intend it to move in. And we never lose control of the power we give to those politicians to make these decisions.
I think that's such an important point that brings us back even to the Doge conversation and Trump 2.0. In my notes, I'd written down, like what's the key story of Trump 2.0 so far, and there's going to be a lot of stories. But what is the theme? What's the argument being forwarded? And one of my notes was transparency that you just said. The reason I wrote that down is not just because it's so important, but it does feel like amidst all the bombast, amidst all of the controversy and the drama and the provoking of the media and provoking of our allies and adversaries, there's this brilliance underlying everything Trump and Elon and Doge are doing because they're being openly transparent. I mean, even something very simple of Donald. I was joking with my parents who don't like Trump. I mean, maybe they're slowly coming along. But one of the things I said, you might not like him, but the guy's done more communicating with the American people and with the media about every single move he's making, every decision he's thinking about, every question he has about something, more so than any president we've maybe ever seen, especially in the age of information. I mean, he is doing, I'm seeing on YouTube, these very popular multi-million follower YouTube accounts that were not interested in politics. They're streaming his White House briefings because they're calling them the Daily Podcast, the Daily Trump Podcast. And, that's funny, but it also, to your point, it's transparent. It's like at a certain point, you can't really argue with what he's doing because he's just laying it all out there and saying, yeah, we're thinking of doing this. And if you're, in favor of USAID or whatever it is, Elon's response to these journalists is just like, we're not keeping any secrets. You can literally look at everything we're doing right now. Don't you think we should be doing that with the whole government? And it's putting the media in this very strange position that maybe the USAID disclosures have shed a lot of light on for people. And I'm interested. I know I keep getting sidetracked, but that's the point. From a warfare perspective, maybe we overstate it sometimes to the point where we end up understating it. But this disclosure of funding going into mainstream media, if you had told me 4 years ago we were going to get that kind of disclosure, that I would believe it, it would seem like one of the most important disclosures that maybe we could get in this information war, because that's one of those roadblocks that I think you hit when you're talking to what we call a normie, right? Like, my parents are not stupid people. My in-laws are not stupid people. But when you tell them the media is literally lying to you, are literally paid to lie to you, their job is to lie to you on behalf of the system. That was a conspiracy theory until a week ago, 5 days ago or so. But from a warfare perspective, the military, the good military, I mean, have obviously behind the scenes taken a vested interest in the power of the media establishment, right? Since the advent of Trump.
Yeah. No, that's very true. And so, this is a very sad story. And most of us, especially through the, even before the Obama years, but we could see the signs that this was true about the media being controlled by the government. And it was manifested in the following way. We as general officers would write pieces that were relevant for the American people to be aware of. Technologies that were coming about, threats that were out there, things that we needed to be paying attention to. And none of us could get anything published in any of the mainstream media. Nothing. I mean, and the response was this same arrogance, like, we can't publish that. And the answer was, the question was, why not? Well, because it's a lie. And we're like, no, this is the truth. It's not classified. It is, here are the facts. And many of them from the intelligence community corroborated. And then, so what we did is we said, okay, let's go through the institutions of higher learning. So we would go to professors, historians, and professors in the art of war, Stanford, USC, UCLA, Harvard, Princeton. And we would get these professors to go ahead and write the essence of the conversation we needed the American people to hear. And it was shut down. And in many cases, those professors were fired because of the money and the control of other countries and the government in these institutions of higher learning. Basically, the call to the provost or the president of the university would be, if you publish that piece, you don't get funding. And so they would not publish the piece to protect their cash cow. So money and the corruption that you're talking about goes far beyond just the military and the media. It also goes into institutions of higher learning, but it's all about narrative control. It's all about information warfare. And it's the main event, because when you think about a fight, so we two countries, but it's more than that, because you have to think about every country. But two people are going to fight, and there's nobody else around to keep it simple. If you don't even know what reality is, and the other person is controlling what you see as reality, they can so easily make you act in ways that are counter to your own survival or benefit, and to their advantage. And that's what has been happening more and more insidiously and fully across our lifetimes. Again, like the old adage, we fell asleep slowly like a boiling frog. We were in the warm water and felt good and lazy, and everybody just got up in the morning, had a cup of coffee, went to work, came home, had a beer, watched a show, or a sports event, and went to bed, and rinse and repeat, and have a weekend to go out on the boat. And we'd vote when we felt like it, and not realizing the power we were giving to these people, and not paying attention to what they were doing. And so we deserve it. I mean, our founding fathers warned us of this, as you point out, and others do as well. But they never envisioned the kind of technologies we have today that can allow us to truly get back in the driver's seat. And the real question for me is, given human nature and the nature of governments and governance over ourselves, to give us the discipline and the boundaries and the structures and the institutions to maintain our peace, prosperity, health, and security. Can we use this technology to right the ship? And the pride, the ego, the arrogance, and the vanity that makes power corrupt? Absolutely. Can we get to a place where we can spot it early enough as a crowdsourcing population and get rid of it before it becomes a cancer? That's a question.
So I want to transition into that. For anybody who's not aware, the general is very well versed on technologies. Maybe you can talk about where that kind of started and everything, and specifically what technologies you're really interested in or have worked around and for and everything. But the reason I wanted to talk with him about technology in particular, in keeping with this show, is some of my more wacky writing in the last couple of years, or rabbit trails I've gone down, is same thing I did with Russia, of saying, well, okay, if the media's been lying to me about this, why am I then saying, well, they've lied to me about everything with Donald Trump, but I'm sure they were right about Russia being very bad, but just bad people and bad dastardly Russians, right? So of course that was that rabbit hole. But with technology, I started having this, started reverse engineering the stories of technology that I had been told. And as somebody who's very interested in storytelling and fiction, I came from that world, I started just kind of putting it all together and going, besides global warming, and that's a narrative, right? A narrative that my generation in particular was hammered over the head with. You as a human being are inherently a problem, right? Yeah. Like, people don't distill it down to that level, but that's what my generation was essentially told. What is the story of global warming? The story is that you are a problem. Yeah. You, by virtue of existing, are a problem. Now, what are you going to do to solve yourself? Like, that's kind of a story, right? But it goes further than that. And I started thinking about technologies and thinking, okay, in the 40s, in the 50s, when you look at I really like retrofuturism. I've become kind of obsessed with it these days. And it's this idea of what did the future look like from the perspective of people in the 40s and 50s. And the future, the artwork, the storytelling that they were doing at that time after World War II, it was steeped in this optimism that was all about abundance and energy and human progress and technology. A lot of that was nuclear. A lot of that was even robotics. And then I start looking at, well, man, in the modern culture, in modern storytelling, we think bad. When we think robot, we think bad. When we think Terminator, right? When we think nuclear, we think Hiroshima. When we think AI, we think Skynet. Yeah. And start thinking, okay, to your point, maybe that's the most likely outcome, but who is telling me to be very afraid of AI and robots and nuclear energy, etc.? And I'm wondering, I just go wherever you want with it, but how did you get into energy? And in terms of a narrative, where do you think we went wrong when it comes to energy and technology? And do you think it was intentional? Bunch of little questions for you.
Right. Yeah. Well, there's no question that our sense of wonder and our sense of expansive, unlimited potential to design a future of our choosing has been slowly attenuated and crushed since World War II. And in many cases, it's intentional, but it's intentional because of people that are very wealthy with a certain paradigm. That paradigm is oftentimes a technological solution to a human problem that they want to continue riding the wave of revenue. Okay, so let's take electricity, for example. So electricity at the nexus when Tesla and Edison were arguing over which form of energy should we invest in. This is before electricity was common. Edison's model, we all know, because it was a model where you have a power plant, you create electricity, you put it through a wire, you take the wire to the house or to wherever you need the energy, and you've got yourself a system. Tesla's was much more futuristic and actually much more efficient and elegant, a better design. And it was using radio waves, because radio waves carry information, but they also carry energy. And all you need to do is get the receiver to be able to capture that energy and information. And but there were two problems at that juncture in history. One is that Edison was a much better marketer. So back to narrative, okay? Yeah. And the power of his narrative was, well, it's easy to charge a customer because I can put a little meter on that wire and I can tell exactly how many kilowatt hours you have used, and I know what to charge you. Back then, they didn't know how to monetize or at least charge a customer for receiving radio waves. Now we now know how to do that because your telephone or anything wireless. The reality, though, when you dig deeper into that history, is they did know how to do that, but Edison won the narrative. He won the marketing, and now we all live across the entire globe with an energy construct that is very inefficient. I mean, you're lucky to get 20 in the 20s as far as efficiency with all the loss of the electricity over the power lines. It's dangerous, you have to prevent your kids from sticking their finger in the socket, or putting your hair dryer into the bathtub. And it is really stuck, meaning you're not going to get much more incremental innovation in the efficiency and effectiveness of this model, because it was stunted in the design phase, meaning the design was not very clever. Okay. It was a very, very rudimentary, old-fashioned, well, it works and we all live with it and we don't even question. Okay. Is there another model for delivering energy to people around the globe at more affordable price points where energy can be almost unlimited? So I'll get to the answer to that question, which is yes, but I want to give a little bit more. But the way I got into this is, I wanted to fly, and I was fortunate enough to get a slot at the Air Force Academy. And when I went there, I knew it was a technical force, so I chose astronautical engineering or rocket science, because I had a love for space, but a love for aviation and anything up in the vertical. And that gave me some really good insights into some technologies that I was not aware of before. And my intellectual curiosity started digging. And then one of the jobs I had as a general officer it's called the Director of Requirements. But basically, your job is to take a look at all of the technologies on the engineering bench of America, all the engineering benches of America, and bring relevant solutions to the warfighter as fast as possible. And so I had all the combat air forces and communication in my portfolio at the time. And so traveling out to all of these big companies and small startups with these brilliant engineers and taking a look at what they were doing on all of these fronts was my first really doorway into what is really going on in the brains of our brilliant engineers. And it is insanely exciting and hopeful. It takes you back to the 40s and 50s. Even the cars we have today show such a lack of imagination. They all look the same, and it is just a scourge of, so art has been dumbed down. Buildings are they all look the same, these cookie cutter houses. This is all the same. These are all symptoms of a deeper underlying condition, the root cause, that people that are making money with the paradigm that exists now will defend that. And if anybody tries to usher anything new in, their lobbyists go to Congress and say, whoa, they're dangerous, they're scary, and you will not get reelected because you won't get our money for your campaign if you let this startup give you an engine that gives you unlimited power for your car at 2 thimble drops of gas a month.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I like that you mentioned too the cars and how our technology and everything looks. One of the reasons that I've been just so fascinated by looking at retrofuturism artwork and things like that. Some of it's modern, harkening back to retrofuturism, and even that, the way my mind works, fascinates me. The idea that we have people in 2025, we have a genre of artwork called retrofuturism, but what it means is painting images of what people in the 40s and 50s thought the future was going to look like, right? And I think it's almost this, I've kind of been obsessed with this idea of a timeline war. I named this episode Timeline Wars. Yeah, and the story there, or at least what I'm thinking of is, it's almost like we had this story that the American people wanted to tell ourselves after World War II. And, I've only recently started really digging into, you mentioned Eisenhower, and I'm impressed with a lot of the things I dig into with him and Kennedy. And it feels to me like there's this inflection point in there, in this Eisenhower-Kennedy presidency transition, and then obviously what happened to Kennedy, where the stories that they were telling the American people before Kennedy really was embroiled in all this strife, engineered strife when it came to Vietnam, et cetera, Russia, obviously.
Cuban Missile Crisis, yep.
Absolutely, Cuban Missile Crisis, and man, are we seeing reruns of that now. But from a technology perspective and a futurism perspective, that they were projecting to the American people, like, we're gonna go into the future. We're gonna invest in nuclear. We're gonna invest in. We're gonna go to space. We're gonna do this and that, and we're gonna create the future. We're Americans. That's what we're gonna do. We're gonna create the future, as you said earlier. And if it doesn't feel like that was one of the main reasons, to your point, why we pivoted, I've almost been picturing it like we have these parallel timelines and we're on the wrong one. Like they pivoted us to this timeline that is built on fossil fuels. And I'm not even talking about it from a green energy perspective. I'm just saying inefficient. One of the interesting things when you mention vehicles is that Donald Trump is obsessed with Art Deco design. And what's that? That's steeped in that futurism. Elon Musk is obsessed with what do they call it? Streamlined modern design, and it's all about that retro futurism. And I'm wondering, first of all, do you think that the enemy, whoever these enemy is, that the establishment, the globalists, maybe it's, as you're saying, the money interests, did they know we were supposed to go in this different direction? What was Eisenhower and Kennedy trying to get us back to some of what you're talking about here? And were we taken off of that, or is that maybe a bridge too far?
Well, it's hard to know. I mean, what I would say, based on my study of that time in history and my knowledge of what our engineers are capable of doing, is that the people that were trying to maintain their control and their power, both domestically and globally, were successful at almost freezing us with the constructs of that era that we have just been incrementally innovating on since. And that has gotten us into this pattern where everything looks the same and everything is still as inefficient and everything is more expensive. It's all to feed the power and control and money of those that are that were in control then and trying to maintain more and more control. So the brighter future for America was hijacked, okay, and it was intentional. And it was to feed this sense of arrogance that there were a small few that knew better, and that the poor washed masses, the deplorables, or however you want to say it, can't handle the truth and can't handle. This is a way to just maintain them. They'll be happy. They'll have a house. They'll have a car, and they'll just be paying more and more. But now we're at a place where my children, they work. They're college graduates, okay, skilled, brilliant, and they can't afford a house. They, husband and wife have to both work full time and raise the kids, and they still can't make ends meet. And you got to be kidding me. There is no way that should be where we are at. But that's a symbol of the slavery that we have slipped into because we took our eye off the ball. And what Trump is going to bring back is just going to be phenomenal. Even like questioning income tax,
Right.
Most people would say, well, shoot, that's the system. How could I change that? And Trump's like, what are you kidding me? That was never intended. And it goes back to these institutions too, like the Fed, the Federal Reserve, and it just goes on and on. So the narrative that Trump is deploying, again, this gets back to how sophisticated it is. There's a level on the art form and beauty. We have had our future of beauty stolen away to a large degree because of this change in timeline. And I love the way you talk about that because it's true. And people that do these beautiful stories about going back in time, and if you could change one thing, what if you could change the power structure of these people trying to anchor us as a human race in a certain slice in time where they had full control, and the other, the freedom lovers would have won back then? What would be the difference? And this is going to take some time to unpack, though, because they got to the education system. So now there's a whole host of people that were educated in the 60s and 70s that are now CEOs, leaders, and politicians that have a certain worldview, And it is wrong. Their history that they were taught was wrong. Their idea of what is possible was wrong. And it's hard for people, not everybody is, some people are able to jump out of it, some are not. And so, one, we have to take back our education system and start teaching our children the beauty and joy of life that is possible when you are a free person. And that we lost the generations from the 60s through now, I would say. Those are generations lost. Those decades lost of progress. There's incremental progress, okay, but not transformational progress, which is ready to break out. I hired a chief technology officer in my last company, the water company that I was president of, and when they were teenagers, they invented an engine that had 300 horsepower, only weighed about 30 pounds, got about 200 miles to the gallon, and they took it to Detroit back in the 70s, and their lives were actually threatened. The guy said, "You got to be no way." I mean, look at these warehouses full of parts. Okay, look at the supply chains and all the companies. Look at all these sales that were coming in. There's no way in hell we're going to put your engine. That would destroy our profit margin. We would go out of business because that engine is almost free energy for your vehicle. And that technology is still sitting right there and has never been deployed because the system is crushing it. That's just one example of an engine.
Right.
We could go to 1,000 different examples across everything that's useful to a human being.
Well, first of all, it's timely for me in terms of having the kid, and my wife and I. It is interesting. I mean, my parents both worked and everything, but it's not just my generation. It's in the last, however few generations. It's so interesting and dark almost when you look at again some of the artwork from the 40s and 50s, and just little things where you see a Monopoly box, and at the time it's a father coming home from work to a beautiful house and a wife and 2 children, and it's like that's just normal American guy, right? It doesn't mean that there weren't hardships back in the early 19th 20th century, because they were, and those may have been engineered too, but just how slowly they've brainwashed us, where we have the conversations lately of saying, hey, we both work and we do okay, but my wife's the one with the insurance. And now, you shouldn't feel, where have we gone as a country where we're having to sit down and instead of our first thought saying, hey, is it going to be better for our baby if you're home more? Because we're not outsourcing our care. We don't want to outsource our care of our baby. Yeah. But then we've got this whole consequence looming over us of going, well, man, now I got to figure out how to provide healthcare in that way, because that was what she was doing. That's a whole other thing. But what you touched on there, when you talk about like the Detroit example, disruption is the word that comes to mind, right? Technology disruption. Yeah. So if we agree that the system, however it worked, kind of locked us to this older technology, one of the really interesting dilemmas that I'm fascinated to watch how Trump and his allies start to try to untangle this is reconciling these storylines that to a lot of Americans don't seem reconcilable. And an example of that would be Trump is the drill baby drill president, right? Yeah. He got that vote because it's all about American jobs and security. And yet we know that, at the risk of sounding like one of those crazy liberals, clean, abundant energy already exists and is way better for us to be using. Not about the environment, not about any of that, but literally energy efficiency. It would be way better for us to go into a nuclear future, or some of the stuff you're talking about, some of this Tesla technology. So maybe you can talk about how did, if we be optimistic here, and let's just say we are going toward these optimistic futures. I think you have an optimistic mindset. How do we as a country start to move forward in these step changes in technology without highly damaging disruptions to what we've got going on right now on an economic level?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so here is how I think that this will be done, because I can see that this is part of the plan, just in some of the comments and some of the comments behind the scenes that are happening in this administration and in his last administration. You're right, it's about timing. Okay. So at this juncture in history, for America to be energy independent and dominant is a power card that is essential to usher in the latitude to start bringing in some of these other things. And you bring them in a way where it contributes to the current investment. Okay, you can have disruptive change that actually people have the time to get on board and retool and retrain. And now it brings American jobs and American manufacturing. So there is an economic plan in place, but the narrative in the opening volley of his Trump 2.0 is drill, baby, drill, energy independent, energy dominant. And with that Trump card, he builds himself the strategic room to be able to start ushering in other things that actually make us more prosperous and efficient and better stewards of the environment as well, because that is something we all have in our hearts too, but not to the degree where the left basically says, you're the problem, human being, and we need less of you, even though the reality is that we are carbon dioxide making machines for the blessing of the plants, which are the oxygen producing machines that are the blessing to us. This is God's natural, sustainable way. And Trump is all about that. But this is about beauty. Okay. Now, let's go back to some of the foundational root issues here. One of them is beauty. The other is truth. Okay. The narrative warfare is about truth. It's really about finding truth. So I want to go back to this because this is something that President Trump is going to be doing as well. And it's another layer of this masterful plan to uplift the human condition and America being the leader into this new golden age. And that new golden age insinuates everything that your imagination can envision. And art and beauty is one of them. When I go to the movies now, most of the previews are horror films with satanic, just horrific images. We can't even look at them. Somebody coined the little saying, it's a ceiling scene, meaning kids, it's a ceiling scene. You got to look up at the ceiling. You can't look at the TV, can't look at and you fill your brain with these images and it affects you. I mean, it affects your sense of joy, your sense of horror, your sense of fear, your sense of good and evil. And it is pervasive for our poor kids. You can't go to even a good rated movie without seeing some horror trailer that will give you nightmares. Okay. So we as a society have so much work to do on so many layers that have been hijacked. And it's not just the technical side. It's also the art side. It's the beauty side. It's the truth side. And this is where we all as Americans need to realize that one of our civics duties is not just to pay attention to our politicians and square every decision with the Constitution and our values, which are Judeo-Christian values, but also pay attention to the morality of the things we expose ourselves to and our kids to, and bring back beauty and truth. Because it is a victim. And so this goes back to the institutions. Hollywood has turned into something that is a cancer to our kids. But it is a powerful and could be a beautiful thing. And so you're going to watch President Trump criticize, but also try to reclamate, also try to recover, because these things can, if Hollywood were wholesome and pure, and yes, you can still have films that scare people, because it's kind of fun to be scared.
Yeah.
But not to the point where it's satanic and it is more than just scaring. It is feeding the young brain with things that will make them fearful and not the joyful, happy, abundant future that is their destiny that God intended for them. We gotta claw that back as a society, or and that's part of Trump's plan, and it's part of the golden age.
Very well said. I mean, it's interesting because that is so related in my mind to what we're talking about with energy and technology, right? Like if you imagine the ultimate end game of abundance and energy is time. And what do humans do with time? They create. One of the reasons I reverse engineered myself into becoming a God-fearing or knowing person, and I'm very early on that path, but was that idea of kind of clicking in my mind of going, well, what is God? God, what is even the story of God, the creator, right? Well, what would God want to create? What I used to always ask myself this as a kid of like, why? What's the why? It's the oldest question, right? Yeah. The original question. And to me, it seems like, well, if you could create anything, wouldn't you create something that could itself create? And wouldn't you want to see what it would do, right? And it's like, isn't that kind of what we're doing with children? Now I'm thinking of this when I see my son, and he's just weeks old, but looking at him and going, man, he's going to just think he's going to be his own little thing. And we made him, but he's going to make something. He's going to make his own life. He's going to make his own stories. And, isn't that the point of it all? But to your point about Hollywood and everything, it's near and dear to my heart. And, I'm good friends with Chris Paul, who spent, half a lifetime over in Hollywood. And, him and I really want to plant that flag and say, that's the second point you made there. It's not enough. We can't ship art and creation and storytelling off on the iceberg to the island of misfit toys. We got to take that back. Yes. And, we're the ones who have to, I'm okay with some of those darker stories existing and everything, as long as, in my view, it's not just that Hollywood's been pumping this nihilist crap out. I think it's related to everything we're talking about, where why is Superman not a popular character among my generation? He's not a popular character. Now you could say, well, it's been subverted by Hollywood. But I think there's something else going on. I think the reason that a character like Wolverine, it speaks to my generation is because he's seen as pragmatic and as existing in the world that we were born into. Like he's trying to do the right thing, but the world sucks, right? Whereas Superman came out of this zeitgeist of we're going places. I think he came out in the 40s. We're going places, America. And I think there's a disconnect when you show that vision of Superman to a millennial or a Zoomer, really maybe anybody after Vietnam, and they're saying, yeah, that's nice, but that's not, I can't even believe in the superhero image here. Yeah. So maybe that's how we, like both of these things run in parallel, right? If we can make the nation better, if we can make humans more prosperous and less worried about money and energy and time, then the stories are going to get brighter. Just because that's what we're naturally going to gravitate toward.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And one reason why Trump 2.0 is so exciting and why we are so lucky to be alive at this time, because this has never happened in the history of mankind, where there is an awakening to the typical enslavement that has happened. Now, there's nothing new under the sun. You see this same pattern play out in the Bible. In the Old Testament, this pattern of governance growing, becoming corrupt, enslaving the people, becoming satanic, killing their babies, sacrificing, human sacrifice, and then it's a disaster because it's not sustainable. It's not how human beings were designed to be. And so we are living out something that is very predictable, but never in the history have we had such an awakening that's global, with now some of the tools, the technologies to be able to actually explore whether we can sustain this peaceful, prosperous, healthy future that's sustainable, and not go through these sine waves of the birth of a civilization, then the death of a civilization.
I'm curious on that note to ask you, when it comes to technology, I kind of said earlier, I think unfortunately we're in this kind of nihilist age. I mean, I like these movies that I'm going to mention, but the something like Terminator, something like a lot like iRobot, and some of these things. Even this past year, 2 years ago, we had very well made film by Christopher Nolan, Oppenheimer, all about nuclear energy, not nuclear energy, nuclear warfare, and while it's a beautifully made film and true events, etc., there's this undercurrent of nihilism to it all. That's discouraging, right? Because you're looking at like, hey, when you say the word nuclear, what do Americans think of? What do people think of? They think of a mushroom cloud. When you think of a robot, you probably think of something like Isaac Asimov. You probably think of something like Terminator. Maybe some people think, oh, that's going to be great. We're going to have these robot helpers. And when you think of AI, as I said earlier, you think of Skynet. And you're I think I would describe as kind of a techno optimist. I think that you're a human optimist. I am too. And how do you feel about recognizing some risks associated with stuff like AI, stuff like nuclear energy, weaponization of these technologies, versus the need to push forward into that stuff and not be afraid of it and not just bottle it up and say, oh, we made a bomb once with this energy, so we're not going to go into what else it can do.
Right. So I'm really glad you brought this up, because it is so important at this point in history for people to be optimistic about these tools that we design for ourselves. So let's take AI as just one slice of that, but you can apply this to just about anything. AI is nothing more than a tool for a human being. And any expert in AI, and I have some firsthand knowledge in this because the space company that I'm the CEO for, we use AI in our space capabilities for the kind of rapid learning and rapid coding and programming to be able to deal with very complex orbital mechanics, orbital maneuvering, and unexpected events that might happen in space where you don't have a human being there and you need some help. But I will tell you that the last few weeks, for example, with the story of DeepSeek,
Right.
is a perfect example of how our narrative from the movies makes us fearful. That is not the natural human state. The human state is aggressively optimistic, pioneering, adventurous, and always seeking knowledge, intellectually curious and optimistic. That is the natural state. And but I tell you what, if you feed the part of your personality, or everybody has, if you feed the side of fear, it grows stronger. If you feed the side of optimism, it grows stronger. But here is the AI example. DeepSeek is a great story. Now, it's true that we can't trust China, and they probably lied to us about how much money it cost them, and they probably stole those chips from NVIDIA, and violated technology transfer laws and all kinds of things like that. But what people miss out on is it is a story about the decentralization of AI. So AI, most people that use AI right now are using AI that has somebody behind the curtain that has programmed its ideological state. And I think this was even mentioned on Badlands Media on one of the podcasts. But if you ask Chat, and Patrick is very uses it a lot, but right. it is biased, and it lies to you, and it lies to you with great confidence. So you can't trust anything you see or hear these days, and that's okay, because we are still in the infancy stages of this information tool, even called the internet, and trying to find out how we triangulate truth with all of these tools and all the deception that's out there. But the reason DeepSeek is actually a good news story is because it is the first public awareness of a democratized AI. It is something that is now decentralized. Now you can have your own pet AI. Okay. Now you can have a pet. You can make Chat GPT into your pet AI too, but it is still centrally controlled. Okay. Right. DeepSeek is a model of AI that is decentralized, where I can say, okay, DeepSeek, I want you to be my hunter for truth. I want you to go out and look at 10 billion pieces of data, and I want you to triangulate truth for me. Or I want you to map every decision the politicians are making in this country and show me which decisions are counter to the Constitution or the Bible, or my beliefs. And I want you to be my personal assistant in being moral, ethical, and legal, and identifying people that are doing things that are counter. I want you to map the money of every organization to find out if there's any graft or So this is a big deal, and we knew it was coming. I knew it was coming because companies I partner with are already doing that with my space technology. And this just happened to be something that China put out, a big, huge marketing. The companies I'm working with, we have non-disclosure agreements, and they're doing this quietly. But this is a good news story, and people need to start using AI as a tool, because it's nothing to fear. And it will never be two things that you may have heard me say before. It will never be creative. It will never be visionary. It may look creative and look visionary because it moves so fast and can devour so much data, but it will never. Even DeepSeek right now will only give you 76% truth, if you do the analysis. But AI is so predictable. There was a student at Stanford back in 2000 that wrote a program where you can feed any text or any video into it or any picture, and it will tell you exactly what percentage was built by AI and what percentage was built by humans, because it is so identifiable. AI is so stupid that any other AI can determine what's real and what's not real. And so you use it as a weapon for good. You need to have your own pet AI. You need to get involved with it. You need to know how to use it. And people fear everything new. My dad had a slide rule, and he did not like computers because he thought you would get lazy. Your brain would get lazy. But if you can't use a computer now, you're not going to succeed in business or in life. Okay. Well, maybe you will actually, but the same is true with AI. We need to not fear it. We need to use it. We need to turn that tool into something that every human being uses to fight anything that is not good.
Very well said. I've come to believe that strongly. One of the interesting things that spun out of the DeepSeek storyline, and that's all we can really confirm, right? We've got this technology, but I mean the narrative around DeepSeek. Who knows? Like you said, we got China involved, but some of the conversations we've had on the Power Hour recently, and Chris and John have talked about is, mileage varies for people on people like Sam Altman and some of the figures in Trump's orbit. We've talked about before the idea that I have faith that Trump knows who is who and what's what, and a lot of times that's enough for me. But it was interesting that you had Elon coming out and really going after Altman and OpenAI, which is not so open. And isn't it interesting that this Chinese AI kind of rug pulled that whole business model, right? Which to a lot of people seemed like an attempt to silo AI creation. But when it comes to AI, I think that, and some of these other emergent technologies, I don't know if you've heard of dead internet theory, but the basic idea, one of the things that I kind of push back on people who say, hey, it can be manipulated or it can manipulate you, right? Like AI can manipulate you. What if your children are interfacing with AI? And to me, my counter to that would be, you've been interfacing with AI for a long time. And it's not this like Skynet thing. It's that if you're on a search engine, you're interfacing with AI. What is Google? A search engine is an algorithm. An algorithm is AI. It's a thinking protocol. What is Amazon.com? It's a thinking protocol. YouTube is a thinking protocol. It's trying to show you something that it thinks you want to watch. Or, as you said with the input there, if somebody's manipulating the input, it's going to show you specific information to guide you. And to me, if we're entering this age of Grok and OpenAI and ChatGPT and DeepSeek and this competition, first of all, the AI is going to get better. But second of all, isn't it so much better for human beings from the start of their life to know that they're interfacing with AI than to not know that they're interfacing with AI, right? Like that seems to be, it seems a lot riskier to me to think that you're not being manipulated by AI than to know, hey, I'm asking an AI something, and I've got to set my parameters, my mental feedback accordingly.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And so, this brings up another nuance about AI that's really important for human nature and all of us as we walk through this. So, in this early age of AI and the internet, we just need to make sure we are very, very suspicious about everything. We don't believe anything we see or read or hear, and until we've kind of triangulated truth. The 72-hour rule, or however you want to say it. We are very careful, and we have to get better at the critical thinking. And this was even true back, the goal of the deep state or the global cabal is to get everybody on the same page, and then they control that same page, and then they've got you. Nobody's ever always on the same page. You take some tribe in Africa, like the one I grew up in, and there's always arguments about, okay, what's right, what's wrong, what's real, what's not real, what should we do, what should we not do. And so when I think about what do we as an American society, or anybody for that matter, what habits do we need to get back into in order to successfully walk through the changes we're going to see over the next number of years with technology? And the first is, one, to, again, think critically. So don't believe anything you hear, see, or read until you've gotten some time to think about it and research and triangulate truth. That's the first. Then the second is you need to actually use it and engage your intellectual curiosity to be a learner, an aggressive learner. If you are not willing to be a learner, you have no business being a citizen of America. And for that matter, you'll eventually be a slave to somebody who has figured it out and can use your laziness to get your work for them, to benefit them and not you. Okay, so you got to get involved. You got to turn it into a weapon that you can use to make sure you're defending your responsibility as a father, a husband, as a son, or just a community leader to bring prosperity, health, security, and basically joy and beauty and truth to the people around you. And then the last thing you need to do is you need to start talking to people if you're not talking to people. And I'm talking face to face. So we use this, but even this, I could be AI and you wouldn't be able to tell. So get together with your neighbors, your community, your church community. We need to start talking as families, as neighborhoods, as communities, and get together and discuss and talk. And that's what is brilliant about Badlands too. We were up in St. Augustine there with, Hugh Mann and the northern
that filthy Brit that's
I know
infiltrating all. No, I love him. And
we get the Badlandia here in Florida together a couple of weeks ago, and we're getting together again. This habit of getting together and discussing and talking, we will defeat every AI and every tool that will ever be there if we just get back to the human. Now, I can't prevent somebody from lying out of their heart to me as they're looking at me in the eye, but at least I can tell they're not AI. Someday, maybe they'll have a robot that it has AI and looks a lot like you, but one or two questions and I'll be able to tell whether it's truly burning bright or not.
I would hope so. It's interesting when you mentioned the meetups and everything. I was talking about, my brother said, "Oh, it's sort of like Project Mayhem." When I said, "We've got Badlands groups like cropping up everywhere," and he said, "Oh, Project Mayhem from Fight Club," and I was like, "Well, I think a good version of that, right?" But it's interesting. Somebody in Myrtle Beach, there were some people from Duxbury, Massachusetts, that came down to Myrtle Beach. And, one of them came out to me, "Oh, I'm from Duxbury." I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." And somebody else came out to me from Duxbury. Then somebody else from Duxbury. It turns out that they had all kind of figured out that each other were Badlanders in that area. And then they started kind of meeting together. And I heard another anecdote where somebody over where I went to university in Framingham, Mass, they did a couple of meetups the last few months. And, they didn't know each other before the meetup. I think maybe a few of them did. But at this meetup, one of the people who organized it goes there and recognizes her dentist is at the meetup as a Badlander. So, these interesting things. And I think even that is you think of it like nodes in a network. It starts to show you where what the internet can do is it can connect us, but can also silo us a little bit. And then all of a sudden you go to a Badlands meetup and you think it's this little niche thing that you're into, and your dentist is there, right? But I love the last point you made about AI, because to me too, I think you use this term a lot, but battle space, and Rich Higgins, I don't know if you're familiar with the Higgins memo.
I am.
John Harold has obviously done a lot of writing on the Higgins memo, and we've talked about it. And that's the term from the Higgins memo that really just lodged in my mind, battle space. And if I want to be more pragmatic and answer the crowd that's going to say, okay, you guys think that the future is going to be so bright, and what if you're wrong? What if AI is used and we lose this battle with AI? My response to that on a pragmatic level would be, this is the battle space that you're in, right? AI is here. And you better, to your point, start interfacing with it. You better figure out how it thinks. You better figure out how to learn whether or not you're talking to an AI, because if you don't cultivate those skills, if you don't adapt to the battle space you're in, then that battle space is going to control you.
Yeah, it's very true. And so this gets back to one of the human nature dynamics that got us into this mess in the first place, and that's laziness. The unwillingness to fight, to pay attention, and again, being lazy can, not spending energy can be a survival thing, but not in this case. Survival means you have to be active, you got to be engaged, you can't be lazy. And if you are, you're going to lose. So you got to do it with AI. And it's, the good news about it is it doesn't take very long, because AI is getting so good. You can just talk to it and program intent. Hey, I intend for you to be my servant, to find truth. How hard is that? Okay, so you don't need to be technologically savvy, or just get one of the young kids to help you. If you're somebody that feels like you're too old to learn, it's just not true.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a concept that we were talking about movies earlier. The uncanny valley is one of those concepts that they've been talking about in movie making for a long time, and that's the idea that a 2001 Lord of the Rings movie can still hold up and look really great because Gandalf is fighting a fire demon, and fire demons don't exist in the real world. So when we look at a computer-generated fire demon, we're going, yeah, I've never seen a fire demon, so sure. But when you try to make a human, there's something there. And they'll get there probably eventually, but there's something there that takes you out of it a bit. I want to hit. I know I'm taking a lot of your time. Just tell me if you need to spin it up.
We haven't even gotten to Russia yet either.
I know. So I want to hit just one more thing on technology, and then Russia. The technology would just be, I guess, you've touched on a bit of this, but I guess short, medium, long term. Where do you think we're going?
Yeah. When
you talk about this plan, do you think that we're going into this nuclear transition period, going back to what we should have done with nuclear? And the second point on that would be, if so, do you think ultimately we are heading toward some of that radio wave, some of that Tesla, some of that kind of end game of where we're going down the line?
Yeah, no question about it. In fact, it's going to happen faster than you think now that Trump is being able to do Trump 2.0. So it's coming. In fact, people will always ask, well, how long will it take? Well, as long as the regulatory environment and the funding for the development of the technology is there, it can happen pretty damn fast. And Trump is going to be fast tracking that regulatory environment for these companies to be able to do things. And just to reassure your audience, because the narrative, like you pointed out, you hear the word nuclear, they think of a mushroom cloud. I'm here to tell you that the technology is so sophisticated that the kitchen table in your house has a higher probability of going off high order than a modular nuclear power plant that can provide clean energy to a city, for such great efficiency. So nuclear is going to be a part of the energy solution going forward, and it's going to spread like wildfire because it is going to be modular. It's going to be mobile, it's going to be affordable, and it's going to be able to power a hell of a lot of stuff at very high levels of energy, which then means high profit margins, high manufacturing efficiency, and all kinds of things that we need to be the manufacturing behemoth that President Trump is going to usher in. The second is, yes, solar power from space that can be beamed to the Earth using radio waves that will be safe for human beings, safer than going out in the sun for a suntan, or safer than flying in a plane with the radiation that you get when you're flying in the plane, which is worse than going and getting a chest x-ray in the hospital. If people could actually know the level of the technological development, the technology readiness level for these energy sources to be at a theater near you, they would be shocked. It is about, but it has been constipated for decades because of all the reasons we talked about, where it is not the cash cow of the energy companies and the people controlling those energy companies and the big money and the geopolitics of global oil. So again, all of that is woven into Trump's master genius of narrative warfare and narrative deployment in a way that is, again, overarching, is building America and leading the rest of the world into the golden age. And
I like that you mentioned.
Yeah,
I like that you mentioned manufacturing there, because it goes back to one of my earlier concerns or questions, hypotheticals of the transition period. And yeah, I guess it's so simple that you wouldn't even think about it. Transitioning into a nuclear or any sort of energy change is going to require a creation and training of a whole new manufacturing base, right? And we're seeing this even with data centers. Chris Paul talks about quite a bit the idea, and G Money and the Bitcoin boys that I know you've talked about, they talk about quite a bit this idea of it's not all about just AI. There's a lot of energy feedback going on with these data centers and nuclear power and everything. And I don't know if you're involved in any of that stuff.
I am. And so one of the interesting conversations with G Money is, if energy is really the governor for the value of Bitcoin, what if you have free unlimited energy, And so we'll talk through, that consequence. But again, that's an easily solvable problem. But the reality is that energy is at the foundation. And it's not just the manufacturing of the energy machines, if you will, like nuclear, modular nuclear power plants that can be mobile, or solar power from space that can be beamed to anywhere on the planet. It's also manufacturing other things like, cars that are built out of materials and with 3D printing that can make them really beautiful and safe. Buildings where now, instead of a strip mall, you can build something that looks like, it looks beautiful, like some of the cathedrals in Europe, and it's resilient and it's affordable and it'll last 600 years because the manufacturing of these beautiful things that are meaningful and useful to people, roads, for example, airports, airplanes, everything that we use to transport and shelter and house and communicate and view. All of it, it gets transformed with energy sources that are affordable and powerful, and then regulatory environments that allow new things to be ushered in and does not put a wet blanket on anything new because there's a lobbyist there defending the old guard. And this goes back to Eisenhower warning us about not just the military-industrial military-industrial complex. It's the military-industrial congressional complex,
right?
And that will be revealed. What Doge is doing, and this is how they all interplay with one another. What Doge is doing is it's now going to be the shame game for these politicians that are kowtowing to lobbyists that are telling them lies and promising them money in order to put a wet blanket on technology that would help humanity, in order to perpetuate something that is inefficient and old and just feeds the beast of money laundering and people that are trying to maintain control.
when you lay out sort of visions of the future, even just something simple like the buildings, different buildings and infrastructure, it's I think that it sheds light on another maybe understated brilliant narrative move that Trump has made, or that defines his presidency, especially this one. And I guess that's that he's betting on humans. He's betting on people, right? Like at a certain point, if you're against Trump, I think it's okay if you're against him and it's because you think that he's going to fail at these kinds of things, I guess. But even then, why would you want to be against it? There's almost an admission in the system going against the transition and transformation you're talking about. And it seems to be that they either don't want this abundant and incredible golden age to actualize. They don't want to see it, which is probably what we think. But even if I want to play devil's advocate and say that they're just being pragmatists, well, then that's the system telling you that they don't believe in you, right? They don't believe in people. They don't believe, and maybe that's at the heart of the Trump and the MAGA and the golden age story, is just this idea of, yes, if we have abundant energy, if we march forward into technology, etc., we're going to figure it all out. We're going to get better. We're going to make the world a better place. And man, I would not want to be writing the counter narrative right now, because if you're writing the counter narrative, it basically has to start with, you humans are stupid, you're evil, you can't be trusted, and you're going to screw it all up. And I just think maybe people are done with that story. They're looking back to, well, Trump thinks that we could do it, and then it's fake it till you make it, right? Then maybe people start actually believing that we can create that kind of future.
Yeah, it's tough for President Trump because the other side has had time to craft this narrative that he's just selfish, he's an egotist, he is a tyrant, and he's just in this for his own ego and his own financial gain. It's amazing. We talk to friends of ours like you do that are smart people, and we love them, but they cannot see past the embedded narrative that has been placed in their brain, and they still believe the TV as they watch CNBC or any of the mainstream that still continue to parrot these lies. So we're not out of the woods, as we all know. We got to be engaged. We got to fight. We got to be learners. But I bet on the humans, and historically, it's a good bet because per capita, there are more people in prosperity, health, security, and peace than ever before in the history of mankind. Now, there are a lot of people in poverty because there's more people, but per capita, the world is a better place, and it will continue to be a better place, I believe, because technology does change fate. And as long as there are more people in this world that love their children and love others and want good for other people, we're going to win. And these bastards that are trying to enslave us, that have succeeded to an alarming degree, they're going to fail. And we're awake now, and we're not going back to sleep, and we're willing to fight, and we're going to have the tools. So let's follow this great leader that has had the courage and the guts and the money to be able to break the glass ceiling. And like the Truman Show, our boat has hit the edge, and we are breaking out.
Well said. If you want to talk about it, I gotta ask you about Russia. So, it's near and dear to my heart. It's kind of what started me in the info war. Just so happened to be the thing I was obsessed with at the time. I've said many times, I don't know what the truth is. It just feels like, hey, the establishment. I think I started my first entry of Righteous Russia by laying out a series of accusations, which was, they've called him this, they've called him this, they've called him this. And I ended that by saying, am I talking about Donald Trump or am I talking about Vladimir Putin? Talking about both. And then cited, these men have been officially dubbed threats to democracy by George Soros. So we all feel really great about people like George Soros these days, right? But on a macro lens, one of the notes I'd written down for this was, what we talked about at the very start of this episode was these deployments sort of against Canada, Mexico, Europa. And meanwhile, Trump is communicating more and extending olive branches more to people like Russia, even people like Xi Jinping. I talk about on the shows a lot. Every time Donald Trump tells you something about Xi Jinping, he leads it by saying he's a very smart guy. I know him very well. Now, maybe my theories are out there of there's much more direct alliances going on here, but even on a more pragmatic level, it feels like there's a bit of a narrative inversion going on where Trump is trying to let people know, hey, our allies, our post-World War II allies, have not been very great to us, and our axis maybe doesn't have to be our axis anymore. I'm wondering what you think, especially given your experiences in the military and maybe how mindsets even in that world are they shifting toward Russia and just all that kind of stuff, where we're going with that story, where Trump's taking us with that.
Yeah, thanks for asking this question. And I'll start by saying you're on the right track with what you're writing and what you're saying. Life is complex, and all these countries are complex, and their cultures intertwine with their geopolitics and their national sovereignty and their sense of survival and their historical anxieties. And so nothing is perfect. And that's why you see Trump with this duality, if you will, where you don't want to throw everything out just because there's one little problem. You have to work with what you got, like you said, the battle space you're in. But there is no question that, Russia has the potential of being one of the greatest allies we've ever had. They are more aligned with us than they are misaligned, and we have been lied to for generations about Russia, about China. The people of these countries are beautiful. There are ideologies like communism that are problematic because they are weapons of death, ultimately. I mean, they lead to the control and the suffocation of free will, which eventually leads to control to the point of imprisonment, death, torture, and all kinds of other things. And that's settled history. There's no question about it that ideology leads to murder and it leads to death. But Russia is not that way, and the Chinese people are not that way, even though they have a system in place. And all of them are victims also of this globalist attempt to infiltrate their finances and their economic institutions in ways that control them and control their people and steal away their sovereignty. So they're all pissed off as hornets as well as we are, and there's common ground there. But back to Russia specifically, and I'll just kind of weave a little story here to help people understand how badly we have acted. Even though nobody's perfect, and after the fall of the wall, Russia desperately needed some help, and we turned our back on them. I mean, if you lived in Russia in 90, 91, 92, and 93, it was devastating. It was so sad. And America, literally, we turned our backs on them. And we can chronicle all the ways we did that, but it was literally the crime of the century. And it wasn't just the lack of help. It was the open theft of Russian stuff and property and facilities and palaces. I mean, it was a mess, and we gave them no help. So Russia pulled themselves out of that ditch over many, many years, and Putin is a big reason why they have recovered their national dignity and a sense of a future. But they are still in trouble. Okay. And so that's just one thread of this story. And so there is legitimacy to Russia being pretty pissed off about us Americans and what we did or didn't do, and the mistrust that we say one thing but we'll do another. And part of that is our political system, but part of that is this deep state that has been in control and wants to keep Russia off balance, wants to keep them crippled, wants to keep them the boogeyman and the enemy that fuels the money laundering and the wars and the conflicts that are perpetual that Trump is going to stop. Now let's usher in Ukraine. And so imagine, I'll draw this analogy. Imagine we are America, and historically somebody carved out Texas, Arizona, and California. Okay, but all the people that live there now are there, and now this crime is coming in, human trafficking, drug trafficking, criminal syndicates, weapons labs, bio labs. All this corruption is coming up under our belly here, in our flanks, and it's corrupting our society. It's killing our people. So just as we are protecting our border from fentanyl and all the drug trafficking and human trafficking that is becoming a cancer to our society, Russia was experiencing that through Ukraine because of the lack of Ukraine's ability to maintain a sense of rule of law. Now, Russia is not perfect in this, but there is a problem there, and Russia was dealing with that problem. It is more complicated than that, but those are just two stories that most Americans have never heard. They have not heard about the overthrow of the Ukrainian government in 2014.
Right.
They have not heard about the money laundering and the perpetual war. And so you have to ask yourself this question. When Trump says we need to stop the killing, and there's a proposal to stop the killing, and the European Union goes apeshit that we can't do that, you got to ask yourself the question. And this goes back to narrative seeding, and goes back to this wisdom of Solomon. You propose cutting the baby in half and see who screams, and you start understanding motivation and what's really going on. Just like with Congress, you say, hey, let's do an audit of this, and you see which congressmen scream. You can't do an audit. You can't see what's going on. What do you know about me that I don't know you know? So anyway, I divert a little bit on this, but you need, if you could be told the truth of the Russian history, you would have empathy for the fact that they have been lied about, and that there is a potential. We have to always be careful because, we can be taken advantage of if we're not clear-eyed. But if there was ever a great negotiator that knows the art of the deal, that understands the good and bad in the geopolitical realm, it is President Trump. And he knows how to deal with these strong leaders. And it's not with just Putin, not with China, not just with China, but with India, with North Korea, even with Iran. Okay. And Saudi Arabia is a key to many of these problems that are feel intractable right now, but that can be untied by changing the game and then restructuring something that's actually possible. And it's true with Israel and Hamas and the Palestinians, and it's all playing out simultaneously, and they're all interconnected in ways that most Americans would never know unless they could study it for their lifetime, like I have as a national security professional. But the bottom line for me is to watch a grandmaster at the art of peace, and the art, understanding human nature, and the art of the deal, and the economics, and the motivation, and is crafting a strategy that's going to save America, and it's going to usher in a golden age for the rest of the world as well.
Very well said. It's talk about encouraging futures. We're talking about technology, optimism, and energy, but it's all got to be built on a bedrock of peace, right? And in the Righteous Russia series, it's kind of funny that titling, I wouldn't say it started as a joke, but I like alliteration. And the whole premise was asking the question, what if I just play the opposite game with a lot of these stories? But, it's become something that I feel strongly. I now have a desire to go to Russia. If you've heard me say on shows before, but speaking of my martial arts experience, a red pill that I swallowed years ago that I didn't realize was a red pill at the time was I trained with some Russians in North Boston, Russian Sambo, tough guys. If you think South Boston boxers are tough, train with some Dagestanis. Those guys don't know that there's a difference between sparring etiquette and trying to kill you. But if you get their respect, then the thing I learned about them just face to face is there's no filters in communication. And the guy that I was training under, he had been Russian Spetsnaz in the 90s, and he was talking about, I had asked him, I've told this story before, but on the dojo or the gym wall, there was Fedor Emelianenko, a Russian heavyweight fighter, and then Vladimir Putin. And at the time, I'm a Democrat. I had voted for Obama, but I had been like disillusioned. And I asked him one day, like, Andre, what's the deal? Isn't he like a dictator? And you're over in Boston for a reason. He brings out this photo album of the tours of duty he did in the Caucasus and in Dagestan in the 90s. And he's like, these guys, you call them Al-Qaeda and you call them this and that. He's telling me U.S. Intel has got their paws all over this stuff. And the Europeans have got their paws all over this, and they've been destabilizing it. He's got the Russia lens on, but he's saying, I said, so what's the deal with Putin? And he said, Putin is the guy that came in, sounds kind of Trumpish, and said, enough. When you talk about that 90s era, that was in my research for that series. It was eye-opening to me to think like, oh, you think the wall fell and everything got better. Everything got worse, to your point. And it was these oligarchs, and it seems like Putin, now there's that famous video of him reprimanding Oleg Deripaska on camera and making him sign over his assets. And, I guess to round this into a question for you, it's, one of the assertions I make in that series is that when I look at the story, when I look at how Trump has maneuvered himself, how Vladimir Putin waited for Trump to be off the game board to make these moves in the Donbass, and I agree with a lot of the moves that he's made there from a historical perspective, it feels to me like there has been a lot more coordination than this sudden, we're going to get together and we're going to figure out a peace deal. Do you think that there has been at least communication or coordination for going on much, much deeper between these kind of leaders to figure out peace worldwide than just Trump picked up the phone in January 2025?
So the answer is yes, and we can get into this. The art of diplomacy, and it starts with the art of communication, and the fact that people actually talk to one another. It's the absence of communication where misunderstanding happens, and then war can be fostered. And that lack of communication is something that the power brokers try to control. They want to control the communication so that it is absent and that they can foment war. But I also want to go back to something else about the Russians that you'll really get a kick out of, and then we can come back to the communication between these leaders. I used to ask this question to the Russian generals that I would work with, and I would ask it of anybody I would be having dinner with or meeting with in my role as the general officer from the U.S. on the Joint Staff for Russia policy and strategy. And I would say, why is your culture strong? Why are Russians long-suffering and stoic and strong? And he said, because we teach our children how to fight. And they fight each other, So in a small Russian village, just about anywhere in the Russian culture, those kids will fight, and they use all kinds of martial arts and boxing, wrestling, and they will fight each other, and they don't hold back. I mean, it's not a sparring match; it is a fight.
They don't joke around. Yeah,
they don't joke around, and it is and then they couple it with taking them out into the wilderness and forcing them to survive in the cold and brutal Russian outback. They gain a respect for Mother Nature and a respect for strength and endurance that comes from effort and pain and suffering, and in the form of fighting. So this is their great pride. And they're like, they love us and they hate us. they love Americans because we're the mavericks they want to be. They want to be willing to take more risk and innovate and be pioneers and adventurers, like they see Americans, reckless abandon at embracing life and doing crazy things and failing and trying again. They are much more conservative, so they love that aspect of us, but they hate the fact that we are, we don't have the discipline as a culture, that we're getting fat, that we are lazy, that we are not fighters. Individually, we don't condition strength in our brains and our bodies like they do, and they consider us weak. Now, they sometimes mistake our friendliness for just being weak, and then they get surprised. But Trump knows how to talk to them, and when I'm in my general officer role, I have to be very careful to manage the way I relate to them so that it engenders respect. Because if I'm my typical, when I went to California out of Africa, that California culture is very, hey dude, surfer man, how's it going? That doesn't fly in Russia, as you know. But back to your point about Trump and Russia and these other countries. Yes, there is communication that is happening, and it is strategic. You have to be careful, of course, because your adversaries will use it as a weapon against you, whether it's the Logan Act or any other way. Look at what happened with the Russia, hoax. Yeah. Even when nothing happened, they created something because it can be inflammatory. But this is a symptom, again, of a deeper underlying condition. How stupid it is for us as an American society to be so anxious about somebody talking to somebody else. What the hell, Yeah. Just basic communication, and it's like it's outlawed. You are forbidden to talk to somebody from another country. It just doesn't get any more silly than that. And of course, the Logan Act, when was the last time it was actually used? Right. So, but it becomes a weapon that people use to strike fear. And then, and if you're timid, you just shut your mouth, and then misunderstandings happen and we go to war. So we are so lucky that President Trump is willing to talk and does not let these cowards kowtow him into being silent.
Yeah, I use the term that I had put in that series, the theory of the sovereign alliance. You mentioned Mohammed bin Salman, Saudi Arabia. Ghost talks about him a lot. Some of these figures. And the reason I like that and come back to it so often isn't just because I see it as hopium and optimistic and everything. It's because I think that you can have maybe a more out there interpretation of it, which is maybe how I trend, of maybe these guys have been talking for a lot longer, and maybe their ascension on the world stage is baked into some of that communication that we're never going to be privy to. But I also like it because I can leave that theorizing aside and approach it and say, is it practical and realistic that these men are not part of a secret alliance that have been talking for 20 years, and that they are simply what they represent themselves as? When you think of Donald Trump, when you think of Vladimir Putin, even Xi Jinping, I've been very interested, not nearly down the rabbit hole that I went with Russia, but the Tigers and Flies campaign of 2013 and 14 really fascinated me, and a lot of the analogs between Xi Jinping and, shockingly, Trump and Putin. I had said in my research, I'd come across the idea that despite what we're told about Xi, he seemed to take pains to insulate himself from the Chinese Communist Party during his rise. He was the first Chinese president to put the equivalent of Chinese Marines in his secret service. He didn't want CCP protection. He arrested 14,000 CCP members, right? And, I don't know if that's all good or not, but then I look at the reverse indicators of George Soros calling these guys, these are the worst guys in the world, right? It's the most wanted. And maybe you don't have to think of them as these superheroes that are part of an Avengers group, but can it just be as simple as Mohammed bin Salman wants what's best for Saudi Arabia? Xi Jinping wants what's best for China. Vladimir Putin wants what's best for Russia. And it turns out that if Donald Trump wants what's best for America, those are men that he can have great conversations with, where even if you take away the deep state, Europe is not focused on Germany and France and England. They're focused on Europe. And is that some of where some of this disconnect is, where these other leaders are able to talk to each other on nationalist footing and understand each other, and the West has kind of been put into this collectivist cipher like this, and maybe it's NATO. I know you had experience with NATO and everything, but the European Union, how much of it is that of mutual dependency when it really should be more pragmatism and sovereignty?
Yeah. So the first point I'll make is that people should not make the mistake that this is simple or does not have danger. I mean, it's a dangerous world out there, and if we allow, it's peace through strength. If we are weak and we do not have the economic and military power to back up our words and our intents, then all the talk in the world ultimately will not matter. So it is dangerous. It's a dangerous game, and Putin can be dangerous, and he's going to act in his self-interest. And if he can get an advantage over America, he will. And that's like any good negotiator, he's going to get the best deal for Russia he can get. And if it comes at the cost of America because we aren't tough or strong or good negotiators, then that's our problem, not his problem. Same with China. I think, Xi Jinping and some of the things that he's done, I think represent his knowledge that the Central Communist Party or the Chinese Communist Party is dangerous. And, he has to play kind of very careful here to survive and to maintain power. But ultimately, there is more common ground with these countries than there is animosity. And so there's so much potential. And I always want to bring India into this too, with 1.4 billion people, because they are a key player in this as well. And so it's not just these countries. Saudi Arabia is another one because of their relationship with Iran and the Middle East. And so back to Europe, though, yes, this fatal decision of collectivism, where the intent was to have a strong economic throwaway by cooperating and having a common, but a common currency and all that. It has been a failed experiment, and it's costing them more than just economic prosperity. So we'll see how history turns here, but they are not going to have the influence that they used to have, and it's going to get less and less. So, but they have cultural problems, they have immigration problems, they have the collectivism problem and the interdependency with one another. The monetary policy, the fiscal policy play into that. So it's like they put an anchor around their neck and they're trying to swim to the surface, and the anchor is getting heavier and heavier. Meanwhile, these countries like America and China and Russia and India, and they are in their boats, rowing to the shore and to the promised land. And the good news is Europe will benefit from all of this if it's designed right. And Trump is going to take care of them in that regard, not by paying their way, but by maybe getting them to the point where they are suffering enough to say, okay, I got to change something, or we're going to be a third world country.
Yeah, and it'd be nice to see that. We give crap to the Canadians and the Europeans, etc. But I don't, just like in the United States, we're blessed, as John's talked about a million times, with the devolution theory, or whatever you think about it. The idea that if Trump has given us a gift, a big part of that is not having to take things in a more kinetic way, right? Because even though the American people could deal with the deep state in their own way, it's better for all of us if we're able to have a peaceful transition, right? And I do sometimes worry about when I look at places like Europe and think, man, JD Vance can be right about everything he said on that stage, but I was trying to put myself in the shoes of a frustrated German who's listening to him and saying, yeah, he's right, but what am I, German number 10,072,000, to do about this, Mr. Vance? Because there's two ways this could go, right? Like when you've got the European, these leaders essentially just saying, yeah, we control you, you're going to deal with it, we're going to ban your political party. I do sometimes hope, even though I want to stay in our backyard, that, man, I really hope that there's a pathway for them that doesn't involve them just taking their countries back, right? Even though they probably will do that if they need to.
Yeah, no, I think there is a path, and this is a great point because I guess the point is best framed by saying that the secular slowdown of the global economy, or this wet blanket on the prosperity and productivity of working people around the globe, is something that people don't recognize how massive it is, and once America strikes this spark of energy and manufacturing, and then sovereignty in China and Russia and India, the rising tide will lift all boats. And there is an economic pathway of Europe being able to recover without violence or too much suffering. So do not underestimate how much efficiency has been lost in the global workforce because of these policies, these ideologies, and the global deep state, for a lack of a better term, controlling and enslaving everybody through the taxation, the inflation, and the monetary and fiscal policies that exist around the globe, and the money laundering that takes place. When these things get cleaned up, it's going to be amazing. When that blanket is lifted off, it'll be like an engine that was running on a V8 that was running on only 2 cylinders, and now it's running full throttle on all 8 cylinders. And just watch what happens.
That's a good note to end this conversation on. I've taken a ton of your time tonight. I really appreciate it. I'm going to go through some boosts and rants. If you'd like, you can hang out for a few minutes. If you've got to go, then that's totally okay.
No, you never leave a brother, So I'm in the foxhole with you for the long run.
Yeah, I'd like to think that if I've developed any kind of reputation, it's that if you've watched anything I've done or interacted with me and you think you're getting on this show and you're leaving within 2 hours, I don't know what you were thinking. You did this to yourself. No, it's been great. Like I said before the show, or at the beginning, General Kwast and I have run into each other at all of our guard events, and just because we're interacting with all of you guys and everything, we're not able to have these conversations. So this was a great way to do it. You're gonna be in Vegas, right?
Yeah, I'll be there, but I just have to correct you one thing. You said that over the 2 or 3 times we've met, we only got to talk for about 16 seconds. I had 17 seconds actually on my log.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well said. Well said. People, I pick up the Kwast nuggets, guys. I just that's how we play the game. We have to nail each other down on this.
The other thing I have to say though, and this is from Joni, but for me too, and that is, Mrs. Bright she is a shining light of beauty and hope in this whole movement. And she does not get near enough of the credit she deserves. You are a lucky man, and we all are fortunate because she keeps John and everybody else on track.
Her trying to keep John on track is, if you guys only knew. And I will say, John's gotten better. Yeah. He knows to heed Mrs. Bright. He does not heed me, but he heeds her. Now she's man. You think you love your lady, and then she has a baby with you, and that changes the whole equation. And
force of nature. Amazing. So I'll let you get to the rants, and I'll try not to be too snarky on them.
Yeah, she's doing a great job, but all mothers question themselves. I tell her every day. I don't say she's a guiding light. I mean, we don't do that, but. Micro Toolmaker, $117. Hey, BB, always looking forward to every show you're on, especially the narrative, where we go on, we go all. Thank you very much. Micro Toolmaker has been supporting all of our shows. See, unfortunately, General, you've created a monster now. She heard you. She's still lurking. I don't think I'll be in Vegas, unfortunately. Mrs. Bright is not letting me go because we've got this baby.
You'll be in Plymouth, right?
I will be in Plymouth. Okay. Baby Bright was born in Plymouth, Massachusetts on the 1st of the year, so it's a special place for us. And will you be up there? Here?
So I spent quite a few years up there at different grad schools, both at Harvard and Boston University. So whenever I lived up there, I always did my flying down there at Plymouth, a glider flying down there at Plymouth.
Awesome. Yeah, there's an air base on Cape Cod. There's a nice. I've actually was learning recently that Buzzards Bay is considered like one of the most strategically sound sort of naval and air force areas in the world, because you've got the canal and you've got the bay, and that's not an easy place to get around. Tom Terrific 54, $50. Really like the speech J.D. Vance gave in Germany. It looked like a lot of the Europeans didn't take it very well. Here's something for the cause. Thank you very much. I bet the Europeans that matter did. Nobody 777. $10. God bless you both. You've taught me many lessons in language and thought. Thank you. Melindy, speaking of fighting with combat sports, David Whitehead would be a great narrative guest. He was able to reopen his dojo last year. That's good to hear. I haven't spoken to David in quite a while. I knew he had to close that, I think, during COVID. 2000 Xmas Barbie, $50. Great show. Thank you. Very much appreciate it. Nobody sent another 20 over. General, I mentored a young graduate from the class of 86. He became a very successful businessman. I think there was something special about your class. The 17 spires were inspirational.
He's talking about the chapel there has 17 spires.
Raging Smirk, $10. General Kwast, so thankful for your parents. I was one of their students at Biola in their mission class in 1977 to 80. They were a blessing to my life.
Nice.
That's awesome. That's great. Mrs. Love, 2020. Awesome show. Thank you. Shelty Mom, $30. Excited for our future. I'm 71 and hoping I'll see a lot of our granddaughter's future. Good show. Thank you. Thank you very much. Based the Kid, Q for the General. The flat earth debates become divisive. Now it's gotten to, is space real? Few are as qualified to address this as you. Can you please provide some insight?
Yeah, well, I'm going to solve this once and for all. I'm going to take Patrick to space, and then he can tell you.
And we're going to leave him there. That's part of the deal.
No, we'll bring him back, but he will be a changed man.
Oh man, that would be like the most watched Badlands event. We do viewing parties for it.
We'll do it from Cape Canaveral.
Fantastic. We'll play Mrs. Bright. We'll plan a guard all around that, and that'll be the main event.
So my company, I have a launch going in 2 weeks on the 26th, and this is NASA decided this, not me, but on the 26th at 7:17 p.m. the rocket launches to send our computer to the South Pole of the Moon, to be the first true supercomputer on the South Pole of the Moon, and radiation detectors that will give us data that no other company on the planet has, to build computers and habitats in space that protect us from radiation. So
do you want to talk about your company at all, or what you're involved in, or rather?
Okay, but my company is building the kind of logistics where we will be able to take Patrick to space before he knows it. So he better be ready to strap on, and we'll all watch him from the peak.
Right. I know you've got
as he hits the firmament.
You've got a maze of partners you're dealing with. So I know there's always you're limited in what you can talk about there. Tom Terrific, I saw that one. Cam Cooksey hung out with Cam in Myrtle Beach, kept me up very late. $17. Best 2 hours 25 minutes I've ever watched. Thank you both. I assume he means the last 20 minutes just sucked. Yeah. Mrs. Love, we're already inspired from the show. Thank you. Cam sent another one. General Kwast hits the Truman Show reference. That's the flaming elbow emoji. If you can't see it, God wins. God bless both of you and your families. Thank you, Cam.
Nice.
C Masters, $100. General Kwast's input really adds to the conversation and validates much of how this community and all our favorite Badlanders view the War of Stories. Great show, BB and General Kwast. Thank you. Yeah, maybe we'll have him back sometime. I mean, we'll see.
So much to
counter. Counterinsurgent. This is one of the best episodes of anything I've seen on any media. And I did not pay that person to say that. That's what they said. Thank you. B. Plunkett, $100. BB, from the time you were a blinking tiger emoji to now, I've appreciated your work. This episode is a high point on the climb. Thank you to General Kwast for his time, perspective, and faith-based positivity. Yes, much appreciated. Thank you for the support. And man, I said this a couple years ago. I think one of the big lies of the establishment is that realism has been conflated with nihilism. And it turns out that an optimistic future is pretty damn realistic, I think. So that's speaking of stories, I think that's one of the stories they've told us.
Yeah. Well, you take anybody in history, at any point in history, and you plop them into today, and they would say the same thing. Oh my God, look at what you've done. Look at where you're at.
Right. I guess I skipped one from Tom. Sorry, Tom. Another 50 you sent over. I expected a good conversation. This has been better than I ever expected. I think that was your second one you sent over. Thank you very much. Tattooed Teacher. Another regular.
She's awesome.
$17. Thank you, General Kwast and BB. Thank you, Tattooed Teacher. You better be in Plymouth. I've been telling people, they were getting on us. The New England Badlanders were like, you better do one in New England, so you better show up. That'll be an easy drive for us. We'll probably just bring Baby Bright. Let the arrest begin. $20. Thank you, gentlemen. Sending this stream to all my family and friends. Very big spark of cognition we needed. Thank you. And I hope I didn't piss off all the Canadians too much at the start of the show. But I did tell them, that exhibition hockey game the other night, if you think Trump's going hard on you now, we will take hockey from you too. If you keep screwing around. Live free or die. $20. Super great show, BB. Met you at Myrtle General and can't thank you enough for hanging out with BB, sharing your hope for the future. Hope to see you again in the future. The General is now becoming notorious for being involved in these large restaurant gatherings around Gartz, and it's like the first time you guys went out, there's probably like 8 of you. Then the most recent times I see a picture of you guys going out to dinner, there's like 30 people, and my bill splitting logistics mind just gets stressed out looking at it. That's the only thing that stresses me out about the meetups. I'm like, who is taking the bill? Bill, if you do go to dinner with General Kwast, the bill is not on him. That's not allowed. Ravelin, awesome convo. Thank you, BB. Thank you, General Kwast, for 17. Thank you, Ravelin. ZBM, where in Africa are you from, Steve? Loving the show, you guys.
Yeah.
Was it Cameroon?
Cameroon, yeah.
Yeah. And how long were you there until you permanently left?
About 10 years.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's...
My dad got so sick with malaria and filariasis that, one more mosquito bite and he would have been dead. So he had to come home.
Well, it's great that you found your way into into helping guide us in the future instead of just staying there. Maggie Bund, Deadwood, hopefully with the Kwast, $20. You think you'll be in Deadwood this coming year? Well, this year that we're in?
Guaranteed.
Deadwood was great. That was the one that we talked about where John kept wanting to do it and Mrs. Wright kept shutting him down, and then we did it and he was right. It was cool.
It was amazing.
Very cool.
My place.
Plymouth will be cool too. A lot of you guys, I think you're in for it's a very walkable. Where we are at the hotel, it's all just like everything's walkable. Just walk to restaurants and bars and all of that. Country girl at heart. Sorry, it's not more. Work's been slow, but thank you both. I learned a lot tonight. Thank you guys. We always appreciate anybody who supports these shows. Mm-hmm. We do have our sponsors, and we're very lucky to have them. But so thank you to Save Pulse. But you guys are the backbone of what we're doing here. I mean, we couldn't do events, we couldn't do any of this stuff without you guys supporting us. And one more came in at the wire. Fixed Bayonet, General Kwast. I always enjoy your insights and conversations. Thank you for being involved in Badlands Corner of the Great Awakening. Great show, BB. Thank you very much, Fixed Bayonet. There was a boost from last week. Let me grab. Kobe Lawrence sent $17.17 over. The narrative hosts some of the most eloquently thought out conversations I've ever heard. BB, you're an awesome man. Much love and good luck with the kiddo. You know, I tell Mrs. Bright I'm an awesome man every day, and she just stares at me. No, thank you very much. Thank you very much, General, for joining. Great conversation. Hope to have you back. I will see you in May in person, if not before.
Yeah, that sounds good. And just one last point. I just want to compliment you on you've got a great gift. Your mind, your ability to think and write and connect dots. It's just really powerful. It is very humbling. And we are all damn lucky that you have decided to contribute to your life to this cause. It's something your great-grandchildren will write about, but it's really special. And I've seen a lot of talent in my life, and you just are very, very precious to all of us. And don't ever forget it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And John Harold's soul, his heart just dropped in his chest for you saying that. But thank you very much. It's very humbling. It's the General also acts as a unofficial Badlander therapist for some of us hosts, where we go there and we get the imposter syndrome, and then he makes us feel good, which may or may not be a good thing. But thank you very much. Never thought we'd be doing this stuff. And speaking of Mrs. Bright, really, I started doing this so that I wasn't driving her insane, because I have to put this stuff somewhere. And I saddle all of you with it. So that's what we've decided to do. As always, the war is a story. The story is a war. Act accordingly. I'm going to outro us with the intro. Thank you guys so much. Please share the show. And thank you, General. I'll be seeing you soon. And good night, everybody.
We were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here.
How many men have you killed, Malone?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious Randy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. While you rested in your cradle of power, you were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. And now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through. It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope!
We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such time, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us.
Forgive me. I did not see. I have failed you all.
You fought bravely. Captain Honor, I do not know what strength is in my blood. But I swear to you, I will not let the White City fall. Our people failed. Our people
our people.
I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins.
No. Now it ends.